My name is Colleen Dorsey. I am 44 years old. For 19 years, I have been the large animal veterinarian for Hollis County, Missouri, which means most people around here know my truck better than they know my face. 3.5 weeks before Thanksgiving, my brother-in-law typed the wrong name into a family group chat. He typed mine. 62 messages. I read every one of them. Not a single one included me, and it was the second year in a row. My mother had written it out plain, the way you write a grocery list. Don't let her know until the papers are signed. My sister answered right under it. Tell her it's canceled. She believed that last year I was sitting in the cab of my truck when I read it, parked at the end of a field road with the dome light on and the heater ticking. My hands still smelled like disinfectant. Behind me, in a cold barn, there was a heifer with a calf that had come out backward an hour earlier. And both of them were going to be fine. I did not call anybody. I did not answer. On Thanksgiving morning, I sent one line into that chat. 2 hours later, my phone started ringing, and it did not stop. Here is the part none of them ever checked. 9 years ago, my grandfather walked into a small office on Main Street and filed a stack of paper. And not one person in my family read it all the way to the end. I want to be careful about how I tell this, because it would be easy to make it sound like I was clever. I wasn't clever. I was slow. It took me 19 years and one accident to look at my own family the way I look at a sick animal, which is to say I finally stopped listening to what they told me and started reading what they left behind. That group chat was the smallest of the 3 things I found out before spring. The heaviest one didn't come from anybody with my last name. Welcome back to Revenge by Truth. This channel is for the ones who get called and never get counted. If your name has ever been left off a list, and then you were told you invented the whole thing, sit down and stay a while, say something in the comments, and subscribe. So the next one comes to you. The call had come in at 10 minutes past midnight. A heifer at the Ochoa place, first calf, 3 hours into labor and nothing showing. I pulled my barn coat on over the same navy work shirt I had been wearing since Tuesday, and I drove out with the window cracked so the cold would keep me honest. She was down in the straw when I got there, breathing in that shallow way they get when they have already spent everything. I stripped to my shirt sleeves, pulled on a shoulder-length glove, and went in after the calf. Backward. Both hind feet presented, hocks locked, and the cord already pinched somewhere I could not see. There is no clever part of that job. You get a chain on one leg, then the other, and you pull with the contractions and not against them. And you talk the whole time in a low voice that is more for you than for her. It took 19 minutes. The calf came out slick and gray and did not breathe. I cleared his airway with 2 fingers and put a piece of straw up his nose to make him sneeze. And he sneezed. And then he breathed. And then he was a problem for tomorrow instead of tonight. My coat was hanging on the gate the whole time. My phone was in the pocket of it. I heard it going. You always hear it going. Out here, a phone buzzing at 2 a.m. means somebody else's cow, so I let it run and finished what I was doing. Cal Ochoa came out with a thermos while I was washing down. He is 71 and does not talk much. He looked at the calf standing on his ridiculous new legs. And he said, "Well," and I said, "Yep." And that was the whole conversation. That is what most of my work sounds like. I did not check the phone until I was in the truck. 62. Not 62 seconds of somebody trying to reach me. 62 separate messages, stacked one on top of another in a group I had never been in before. With a name at the top that had a little turkey next to it. I sat in the dark with the engine running and I scrolled up to the beginning because that is how you read a chart. You do not start where the panic is. You start at the top and you go in order and you do not decide what anything means until you have all of it. The first 30 were nothing. Who was bringing what time? Whether the good roaster was still at Mom's or in Tessa's basement. My father, Ray, was getting picked up at 4. Somebody was going to bring folding chairs. Message 19 was where the temperature changed, and I did not notice it the first time through. Tessa asked whether Monday was still on. Message 24 was my mother. Don't let her know until the papers are signed. Message 26 was my sister. 4 minutes later. Tell her it's canceled. She believed that last year. I read those two several times. I want to be accurate about what I felt, because I have thought about it a great deal since. It was not heat. It was the opposite of heat. It was the feeling I get when a set of numbers on a lab report finally lines up with something I have been looking at for 6 weeks and could not name. And I am relieved and sick at the same instant, because being right is not the same as being glad. Message 31 was blank. This message was deleted. Sent by Dale, my sister's husband. Deleted before I ever saw it. Which meant deleted before I was ever supposed to be in that room at all. I looked at that gray line for a while. Then I kept going because a thing you cannot read is not evidence of anything, and I did not have room in my head for a second mystery. Message 44 was Dale again, and this one he left up. He had talked to the auction company. Monday was locked. Auction company. Message 62. The last one. Was my mother again. At 11:40 that night, she reminded everyone to act normal if I texted. Act normal, which meant there was a version of normal they were performing, and I was the audience it was being performed for, and I had been the audience for a while. I did not call anybody. I want to be clear about that, because people have asked me since why I did not just phone my mother and have it out. I have a lot of answers for that now. At the time, I only had one, and it was the same rule I have had taped inside the lid of my truck box for 19 years, in my own handwriting, from my first month on the job. The animal cannot tell you where it hurts, and the owner will always tell you wrong. So I did what I do. I started at the top of the thread again, and I photographed every screen, in order, and I numbered them in the file name as I went. 62 messages came to 41 screenshots. My hands were cold enough that the first one came out blurred, and I took it twice. Then I turned the phone face down on the passenger seat and sat there while the defroster cleared a circle in the windshield. I did not know what Monday was. I have to tell you who I am before I go any further, because none of the rest of it makes sense otherwise. I cover Hollis County and about half of the county north of it, 90 miles in any direction from my clinic on the edge of Ballard, which is a town of 1,900 people with one stoplight and a grain elevator you can see from 6 miles out. I do herd health, breeding soundness exams, pregnancy checks, the occasional emergency surgery on a kitchen table when a horse comes in on a trailer at midnight. Calving season runs February through April, and during those weeks I keep a sleeping bag behind the seat and I do not always make it home. 19 years of that. I am good at it. I am good at it for one specific reason, and it is not that I love animals, although I do. It is that I am patient with details that other people find boring. I will stand in a lot for 40 minutes watching a cow that everybody swears is fine, because something about the way she is holding her left hind is 1 degree off. And I would rather look stupid for 40 minutes than be wrong on Thursday. That patience has never once been interesting to my family. Let me lay it out the way I would lay out a history. I am the older daughter. Tessa is 6 years behind me. Growing up in that house, there were 2 categories of child. And the categories were never named out loud, but everyone understood them perfectly. Tessa was the one you talked about. She was in the Christmas program. She got the good grades in the subjects people ask about. She had a laugh that carried. My mother drove her everywhere. My father, Ray, took pictures. I was the one you called. That distinction sounds small. It is not small. Being talked about means you exist when you are not in the room. Being called means you exist when somebody needs something lifted. Here is the record, and I am not going to editorialize it. I am going to read it to you the way it happened. When my mother's furnace quit in January 11 years ago, I paid the deposit from a truck stop outside Kirksville and drove home at 1 in the morning to let the man in. When my father needed his hip done, I took 9 days off in the middle of breeding season and slept on the couch in their front room and drove him to every follow-up. When hail took half the shingles off the home place, I called 3 roofers, got 2 bids, picked one, and wired the down payment before anybody else in the family had finished saying somebody ought to look into that. When my grandfather went into the hospital the last time, I was the one who sat up with him, because I was the one who could read the monitors and translate what the nurses were saying. Nobody ever thanked me for any of that. And I want to be honest that I did not want to be thanked. That was not the deal I thought I had. The deal I thought I had was simpler than that. And I believed it for about 20 years without ever once saying it out loud. I thought being useful was the same as being counted. That is the whole thing. That is the sentence underneath everything that happened next. And I am only going to say it once. Because here is the arithmetic I never did until I was sitting in that truck. In 19 years, I was called 40 or 50 times. In 19 years, I was invited maybe 4. And every single time, the calling and the inviting overlapped. The calling won. I hauled a freezer up my mother's basement stairs on the 4th of July, and then went home and ate a sandwich standing at my own counter. And it did not occur to me to be hurt because I had been hauling the freezer, which felt like belonging. There was one more thing, and it is going to matter later, so I will put it here where it belongs instead of saving it for effect. My grandfather saw it. Walt Renner, my mother's father, he farmed the 180 acres on the north side of the county his whole life, and he died 4 years ago at 88, in his own bed, with the window open, because he wanted to hear the yard. He never said a word against my mother in my hearing. Not once, in 40 years. He was not that kind of man, and I do not think it was cowardice. I think he had watched 2 generations of families in that county tear themselves apart at funerals, and he had decided that whatever he did about his own, he was going to do it quietly, and he was going to do it early. The summer I turned 25, I was between jobs, and I lived in the upstairs room of his house for 11 weeks. He got up at 4:30, he made coffee that could strip paint. He never asked me what my plan was. One morning near the end of it, he said the only thing he ever said to me about my family, and he said it looking out the window, not at me. He said, "They will always take what you offer, and they will never once ask what it costs you. And you are not going to be able to teach them different. So quit trying and start writing it down." I thought he meant keep a diary. He did not mean keep a diary. Anyway, that is who I am, and that is the shape of the house I came out of, and now you know why it took me until 2 in the morning in a truck with the heater ticking to finally look at my own family the way I look at everybody else's herd. There is one more piece of history you need, and it is from last November. Last year, in the first week of November. My mother called me and told me there was not going to be a Thanksgiving. She said it the way you would report weather. Nobody's up for it this year. Tessa's got the clinic short-handed. Your father's back is bad, and I am not cooking a bird for 4 people who would rather be somewhere else. We will do something at Christmas, maybe. I said that was fine. I meant it. And then I did something I want you to hear clearly, because it is the part I have had the hardest time with. I picked up somebody else's shift. Priya is the other vet in my practice. She is 36. She has family in St. Louis. And last year was going to be the first Thanksgiving in 4 years she got to drive down for. She had the holiday on the schedule, and she had been quietly rearranging her life around it since August. I told her I would take it. I told her my family had canceled and I was going to be sitting at home anyway, so she should go see her mother. She argued with me for about 90 seconds and then she hugged me, which is not something we do, and she left on the Wednesday with a cooler in her back seat. I worked Thanksgiving Day. 2 calls, a prolapse at the Renwick place in the morning, and in the afternoon a bull that had gotten himself wedged in a feed bunk and needed sedating before he broke his own leg getting out. I ate a turkey sandwich from the gas station on Highway 6 standing up next to my truck, and it was a decent sandwich. And I was fine. 3 days later, I was scrolling my phone in the clinic office waiting on a lab result, and Tessa had posted a photograph. The dining room at my mother's house. The good tablecloth, the one that comes out twice a year. 4 place settings. Candles lit. A bird on a platter that had clearly been in an oven for 6 hours. Not thawed at the last minute by 4 people who would rather be somewhere else. The caption said something warm about family. I want to describe what I did next accurately, because it was not what a reasonable person would do. I did not call anybody. I zoomed in. I zoomed in on the table and I counted the place settings. Twice. The way I count anything when I am hoping I got it wrong. 4. My mother. My father. Tessa. Dale. 4 chairs pushed in, 4 napkins folded, 4 glasses. Then I looked at the timestamp on the post. And then I looked at the photograph itself, at the windows behind the table, and I could see that the light was afternoon light. And I did the whole thing over again in my head with the correct number of people in it. Then I called my mother. She picked up on the 4th ring. She was pleasant. She was always pleasant. She said, "Oh, honey." It came together at the last minute. Tessa got her hours covered and Dale was already coming with the truck. And it was nothing. It was leftovers and a card table. We did not even use the good dishes. The good dishes were in the photograph. I stood in my own office with the lab report printing behind me, and I heard myself say the following words in a completely level voice. I said, "That is my fault. I should have checked in." She said, "Well," and then she said something about the weather, and we talked about the weather for 2 minutes, and I said I had a call, and I hung up. I want to be precise about what happened in my chest in that moment. Because it was not anger. If it had been anger, it would have been useful. It was embarrassment. I was embarrassed at myself for having counted the chairs. I decided, standing right there, that I had made a large private drama out of a small ordinary thing. That families change plans. That I was doing the thing I had been told my whole life that I do. Which is to take something the size of a nickel and hold it up to the light until it looks like a wound. So I put it down. I threw the sandwich wrapper away. I went back to work. And here's the part that I did not understand. Until a year later. Later in a cold truck, I did not just believe them. I apologized to them. I took a lie that had been constructed on purpose, held it up, examined it, found the seam in it. I found the seam. I counted the chairs. I saw the good dishes, and then I talked myself out of what I had already seen. And then I said sorry to the person who told it. That is not being fooled. Being fooled is passive. That is something else, and it has a cost. And the cost is that you get very good at overruling yourself. Priya sent me a photograph too that same weekend. Her mother's kitchen in St. Louis. About 9 people crowded around a counter. She wrote thank you and a heart. I have never told her. I am not going to tell her. So when I read message 26 in that truck a year later, the one where my sister said tell her it's canceled, she believed that last year. I did not need a minute to work out what it meant. I already knew. I had known for a year. I had simply been very disciplined about not knowing. 2 days after the group chat, I had a herd check at the Doyle place, which sits 8 miles past the home farm on the same gravel road. So I went by it. I want to be honest that I did not go by it for a reason. I went by it because that road goes past it, and I have driven that road 4,000 times. And my truck slows down at that gate the way a horse slows down at its own barn. I turned in. The place is 180 acres, row crop on the south and east, hay ground on the north bottom, and the buildings clustered up on the rise where you can see weather coming. The house, the machine shed, and the old milk house, which has not held milk since before I was born, and which my grandfather never tore down because, in his words, it was not hurting anything. It was the 2nd week of November and the corn was off. Stubble everywhere. that hard gold color it goes. And the whole place smelled like dry grain and cold dirt. There was a combine working the East 80. I could not see who was in the cab from that distance, but the machine lifted a hand off the wheel as I came up the drive, so I lifted one back. Everybody does that out here. You wave at a truck whether you know it or not. I pulled up by the north fence line because I had something to do there. Back in the spring, I lost 2 calves at the Doyle place to something that was killing at night and eating very little, which is the signature of a dog rather than a coyote. Coyotes are efficient. Dogs are enthusiastic. I put a trail camera on a fence post at the corner of the north pasture on the home farm, too, because whatever it was had been crossing that ground, and I wanted to know if it had a route. The camera is a green plastic box the size of a paperback, strapped to the post with a ratchet band. Motion sensor, infrared at night, and it stamps the date and the time onto the bottom of every frame it takes. That is the entire reason to own one. A photograph of an animal is a curiosity. A photograph of an animal with a time on it is data. I never did catch the dog. I kept the camera up anyway, because taking things down is a decision and leaving them up is not. So I did what I had been doing every 6 or 8 weeks for 2 years. I popped the housing, pulled the card, dropped a fresh one in, put 2 new batteries in it, and snapped it shut. The old card went in the coffee can in my truck box, which is where they all go, and every couple of months I dump that can into an old tin that used to have roofing nails in it and sits on the shelf in my garage. That is it. That is the whole thing. I want you to remember that I did it, and I want you to remember that it took 90 seconds and I was not thinking about my family at all while I did it. On the way back out, I stopped at the end of the drive, because something was wrong down there, and it took me a second to see what. There was a stake in the ground at the corner of the culvert. New wood, one end painted orange, and a strip of orange surveyor's ribbon tied to the top of it, whipping around in the wind. I sat there with the truck idling and looked at it. I know what those are. Everybody out here knows what those are. You see them before a road crew comes, before somebody puts in a new field entrance, before a tile crew starts. They also go in when somebody walks a property line with a plat map in their hand. I got out. I walked over to it. I looked down the fence line and I found a second one, maybe 200 feet along, and then I stopped looking because I had a herd check in 20 minutes and because I did not yet have any reason to connect a wooden stake to a phone full of screenshots. I took a photograph of it. I want to be clear that this was not detective work. I photograph things constantly. I photograph a lesion, a lame foot, a water tank with something wrong in it, a gate that somebody has wired shut in a way that is going to hurt somebody. It is a reflex, and the reflex predates all of this by 20 years. I got back in the truck and I drove to the Doyle place and I preg-checked 41 head, and I was there until dark. It was somewhere around cow 19 that my hands kept working and my head went somewhere else, and I found myself thinking, with no particular feeling attached to it, I do not know who put that stake in. Not my mother. My mother has not walked that fence line in 15 years. Not my father. I thought about Dale, because Dale owns a small grading outfit, and Dale is the only person in the family who owns anything with a blade on the front of it. And then I thought, well, sure, if anybody in that family was going to be helping with something on the farm, it would be Dale. And I let it go, and I finished the herd. That was the first time I thought his name in connection with any of it. I want to mark that, because at the time it went by like nothing. It was a thought that lasted maybe 4 seconds in a cold lot with my arm in a cow, and it did not come back for a very long while. When I got home that night, I put the fresh card in my laptop out of habit, scrolled through 106 photographs of nothing. Deer, deer, raccoon, deer, and closed it. I did not look at the old card. Why would I? It was already in the can. The wind came up hard that evening while I was finishing at the Doyle place. So on my way home, I pulled back in at the farm and went into the milk house to get out of it while I washed my arms down. It is 1 room. Concrete floor with a drain in the middle, whitewashed block walls gone chalky, 2 windows with wire glass. It smells like lime and cold stone, and under that, like sour milk, which I do not think is real anymore. I think that smell lives in my head. There is a shelf along the north wall at shoulder height, a coffee can of bolts, a liniment bottle with nothing in it, a stack of seed corn caps, and my grandfather's book. It is a ledger, hard-bound, black cloth. Corners gone soft and round the way they get. Walt kept one his whole life, and when one filled up he started another, and this was the last one. It had been sitting on that shelf for 4 years because nobody had decided what to do with it. I opened it in the middle out of habit, bought the Roan bull off Kesterson, fixed the float on the north tank, rain, 6/10, that is what is in it. 60 years of a man writing down what he did that day, in a hand that got smaller as he got older, no feelings anywhere in it. Just what happened, and the date it happened on, I put it back. And standing there with my sleeves wet, I thought about the one afternoon I have gone back to more than any other afternoon in my life. And I need to tell it to you now, because everything after this turns on it. 9 years ago, Walt went down in the lot. His legs quit for about a minute, and he sat down in the mud on purpose so he would not go down hard, which is the most Walt Renner thing that ever happened. He was 83. The doctor in Ballard put him on a pill and told him to take it easy, and Walt said he would, and did not. 2 weeks later, he called me on a Wednesday and asked if I could run him into town Thursday afternoon. I assumed it was the doctor. I cleared my afternoon. He came out of the house in a jacket with a manila envelope under his arm. He did not say anything about it, and I did not ask, because you did not ask Walt about a thing he was carrying. We did not go to the doctor. He had me park in front of a storefront on Main Street with a hand-lettered sign that said Tax Preparation and Notary Public, and a woman named Ruth Feeney inside it, 61 at the time, reading glasses on a chain. She knew him. Everybody knew him. They had already done most of it. There were papers drawn up by a lawyer over in Chillicothe, and Ruth had them, and Walt signed where she pointed. Then she looked at me and said, "And you are Colleen." And I said, "Yes, ma'am," and she asked to see my driver's license. I remember being confused by that. It felt like a lot of ceremony for a man handing his granddaughter a jacket. She wrote in a book while we sat there, a big flat book with lines in it. I remember the sound the pen made. On the drive home, I finally asked him what we had done. He said, "Put you on the trust with your mother." I said, "Why me?" And he said the sentence I have thought about every day since. And I am going to give it to you exactly the way he said it, because I have had 9 years to get it wrong, and I have not. He said, "I am not going to stand in that kitchen and tell your mother in front of everybody that I do not trust her. That is not a thing you do to your own child. So I am not going to say it. I am going to fix it so she cannot do it by herself." Then he turned the radio on and we did not talk for the rest of the drive. I want to say clearly what I understood that day, which was almost nothing. I understood that my name was on something. I felt vaguely embarrassed, the way you feel when you are given a present in front of somebody who thinks you did not earn it. My mother found out that weekend and said, in the kitchen, in front of me, that it was dramatic and that I did not even live here. Walt said, "It is filed." And then he asked her if there was any more of that pie. That is the whole scene. 9 years ago, I filed it under family, the way you file a photograph, and I did not look at it again. So, that night, after the milk house, I sat down at my kitchen table with a cup of tea, and I did the thing I should have done on the first night in the truck, which was to stop asking myself what my family meant and start asking what was on paper. Hollis County has its records online now. The site is slow and looks like it was built a long time ago. I typed in the legal description off the tax bill I have paid a share of every year without ever once reading past the amount due. It came up in about a minute. Walter J. Renner Family Trust. Recorded 9 years ago in October. 2 trustees named on the face of it. Marilyn R. Dorsey, Colleen A. Dorsey. And then, on the third page, in exactly the same size type as everything around it, with no bold and no underline and nothing to tell you it was the important one, a paragraph about what the trustees may and may not do. No sale, conveyance, mortgage, deed of trust, or other encumbrance of the real property shall be valid unless executed by both trustees. Both trustees. I read that paragraph 4 times. Then I got up and washed my cup and set it in the rack, because my hands wanted a job. He had not given me a jacket. He had not given me a keepsake or a nice feeling or a story to tell at his funeral. He had given me a lock, and I had been carrying it around for 9 years without ever once checking what it was on. My mother called at 9:40 the next morning. I was in the clinic doing paperwork. I had the trust open on the laptop in front of me. The third page, the paragraph about both trustees, and I had a photograph of the recorded page saved in a folder I had named with the legal description and nothing else. I let it ring twice. Then I turned the laptop so the screen faced the wall, which I want you to notice because there was nobody in the room and nobody could have seen it, and I did it anyway. Then I answered. She said, "Hi, sweetheart." She has a phone voice. It is a half step higher than her regular voice, and it goes up at the ends of the sentences. And I have heard it my whole life, and until that morning I had always taken it for warmth. She said she wanted to catch me before I got out on the road. She said the family had talked and there was not going to be anything this year. Everybody's stretched thin. Your father is not sleeping. Tessa is covering 2 people at the office. And I am not going to stand in that kitchen all day for a bird nobody wants. Then she said, "So let's not do it. We will get together after the first of the year when things settle." I want to walk you through what was in front of me while she said this. On my laptop, turned to the wall, was a document with her name and my name on it. On my phone, on the screen I had photographed 9 days earlier, was message 24. In her words, "Don't let her know until the papers are signed." And in my ear was a woman telling me, in a warm voice, in the same breath, that there was not going to be anything this year. Here is what I noticed, and it is the reason I did not say anything. She did not hesitate. I have spent 19 years listening to people tell me things that are not true. Ordinary people. A man says he has been giving the shot every 12 hours and he has been giving it when he remembers. A woman says the horse has been off feed since Sunday and it has been since Thursday, because Thursday makes her the kind of person who waited too long. Almost none of it is malice. It is embarrassment. And that kind of lying has a texture. There is a little catch in it. A half beat where the mouth gets ahead of the person and they have to go back and pick up the story. There was no catch in my mother's voice. There was no half beat. She delivered it at conversational speed with a little laugh at the end, the way you would read out a weather forecast. And then she moved straight into asking whether I had gotten my flu shot. That was the moment it went cold in me, and I want to be exact about what the cold was, because it was not about Thanksgiving. It was this: if she can do this at this speed, she has done it at this speed before, many times, about many things. And I have been on the receiving end of all of them and never once caught it. I did not accuse her, and people always ask me why. If I had said, "I have seen the chat, 3 things happen in a fixed order," and I could recite them before she opened her mouth. First silence, then a correction of the facts, which is not a denial, it is a redescription. And this redescription always makes the thing smaller and makes me the one who blew it up. Then crying. And the crying is real, in the sense that the tears are wet, and by the end of it, I am the one saying I am sorry. I have run that experiment enough times to know the result. So I said, "All right, that is a shame. But all right." She said, "Oh, good, I knew you would understand. You have always been the reasonable one. You have always been the reasonable one." I have been given that line my entire life, and I had never once heard it correctly until that morning. It is not a compliment. It is an instruction, It is a thing you say to somebody right before you need them to accept something, so that accepting it becomes who they are, instead of what happened to them. We talked about the weather, which was going to turn cold Thursday. She asked if I had gotten my tires done. I said I had. Then I said I had a call, and she said don't work too hard, and we hung up. 2 minutes and 40 seconds. I know that because when I set the phone down, I opened the call log and wrote it in the day sheet where I write everything else. Not the words. I did not record her, and I never have. Just the date, the time, and the length. In the same column where I write the time, a temperature was taken. That is not a normal thing to do to your mother. I understood that even while I was doing it. My hand was making the entry, and some other part of me was standing off to the side saying, "Look at what you are doing. This is a person who taught you to ride a bicycle, and you are charting her." I finished the entry anyway. Then I turned the laptop back around, because there was still a hole in the middle of all of it. And the hole was this. I now knew that my name was on the trust, and that nothing could be sold without me. I knew there was a Monday. I knew there was an auction company. What I did not know, and could not get from any document, was why. Why now? Why this year? Why 180 acres that had been sitting there doing what it does since before I was born? Paper tells you what happened. It does not tell you what somebody needed. For that you have to talk to somebody who cannot help themselves. Tessa called 2 days later, and she called for the same reason she has called me my whole life, which is that she cannot sit inside a silence. Nobody had asked her to call. I am sure of that now. My mother would never have sent her. My mother would have known better. She started with the office. One of the hygienists had quit with no notice, and they were double booking. And a woman had come in and been rude about it, and Tessa had handled it, and she told me the whole thing at length. Then the weather, then a thing about a dog she saw. I let her run. I have learned that you do not have to ask people questions. You have to be quiet in a particular way. And eventually they fill it. 6 or 7 minutes in, she said, "Dale's been a bear lately." I said, "Yeah, she said the Sanderson job had gone sideways. They had bit a pond and a lane and hit rock, and the rock was not in the soil report. And Dale had eaten the difference because he would rather eat it than get a reputation. Then the county had put the bridge work out, and he did not get it. And he had bought a machine in the spring expecting to get it. And then she said, 'And there's the note.'" I said, "The note?" And she said, "On the equipment. Well, on everything now." She caught herself right there. I heard it happen. There was a small silence of the exact kind I described to you earlier. The half-beat, the mouth getting ahead. Tessa has that catch. Tessa has always had that catch. It is the only reason I know anything at all. She backed up and made it smaller. She said it was fine. Everybody has notes. That is farming and that is contracting. And it would all be squared away by Monday anyway. I said, sure. Then she said the things she should not have said, and she said it in the tone people use when they are trying to make you feel included in a burden instead of informed about a plan. She said, "Mom co-signed, so it's not just us." Then she moved on to the dog again. I did not say anything. My hand was already writing on the back of a feed receipt. Let me put it together for you the way it went together for me, because it took about 11 seconds and then it was done. And it was the coldest 11 seconds of that whole month. Dale's outfit was underwater. My mother had signed her name to the paper on it, which meant it was not only Dale's problem. It was hers. And it was hers at 71. And the only thing standing between her and it was the one asset in the family that had no debt on it, and had not had any for as long as I have been alive, 180 acres. They were not selling the farm because they wanted money. They were selling the farm because they needed it by a date. And that is when I understood the shape of the thing that had been bothering me since the first night, which was not the cruelty. It was the coordination. Cruelty is loud, and it is usually stupid. This was quiet and it had a calendar. Then I understood one more thing. And this is the one that still sits in me. They did not leave me out because they hate me. If you hate somebody, you fight with them. Hating somebody is a form of paying attention. What they did was much plainer than that. They had a problem with a deadline, and I was a variable in it. And the fastest way to handle a variable is to route around it. Because if they had asked me, they would have had to sit in a room and wait while I read something. And if I read it, I might have an answer. And an answer from me would have to be a real answer. One that could be no. That was the part they could not afford. Not my money, not my share, my no. Near the end of the call, Tessa said one more thing. And I wrote it down word for word on the back of that feed receipt, and I still have it in the daybook. She said, "We figured you were done with the old place anyway." I asked her what made her think that. She said, "Well, you never go out there. I go out there every 10 days. I have a trail camera on the north fence line. I know which gate hangs and which one you have to lift. I was there on Tuesday, Prom, but she is not lying. That is the strange part. She believes it. Because to her, going out there means going to the house. And there has been nothing in that house since Walt died. And she cannot picture a version of caring about a place that consists of driving the fence line without stopping. And I did not correct her. I want to be honest about why. Part of it was strategy, because you do not correct somebody who is still giving you information. But the bigger part is that when she said it, some old thing in me sat down and thought, well, if that is what it looked like from the outside, maybe it is fair. 19 years of practice at overruling myself. It does not switch off because you have finally seen the paperwork. She said she should go. Then, before she hung up, she said, "Oh, and it's a shame about Thanksgiving." That was the only lie she told me herself. And it was the smallest one. And it is the one that got me. She said it the way you drop a coin in a jar on the counter. It cost her nothing. She was not even thinking about it. Then she said, "Love you," and hung up before I answered. She had told me almost everything. She never said the word auction, but there was one thing on that feed receipt in my own handwriting. Underlined twice. Squared away by Monday. The email came in on a Thursday evening while I was writing up a case. Subject line blank. From my mother. One line of text. "Honey, can you sign these and get them back to me by the weekend? Just the estate cleanup for Grandpa's. Love you." Attached was a file called Estate Cleanup Docs. I want to tell you exactly what I did, in order, because the order is the only thing I did right in that whole month. I did not open it on my phone. I finished my case notes. I made a cup of tea. Then I sat down at the kitchen table with the laptop and opened it there. And before I read a word of it, I scrolled to the end to see how many pages it was. 9. 9 pages is not estate cleanup. Estate cleanup is a page and a half, and it says the same thing 4 times. Page 1 was a trustee's consent and direction to sell. That is the actual heading. In the actual type. At the top of the actual page my mother sent me and called Cleanup. It authorized the trustees of the Walter J. Renner Family Trust to convey the entire 180 acres, together with all improvements, by public auction. Page 2 was the legal description. I read every line of it. It was the ground I had driven past that Tuesday. Page 4 had the signature block, 2 lines. Marilyn R. Dorsey, trustee. Colleen A. Dorsey, trustee. My line had one of those little arrow stickers next to it, the yellow kind, and somebody had written the word sign on it in ballpoint. I looked at that sticker for a long time. It was the handwriting that got me round letters. A loop on the G. That is Tessa's hand. She has written that way since she was a girl. Somebody had printed those pages out, put a sticker on them, and then scanned them back in to send to me. That is 4 extra steps. That is a person standing at a machine, deliberately, twice. Page 6 was the distribution of proceeds. one account, routing number, last 4 digits. Account holder Marilyn R. Dorsey. Not 2 accounts. Not a split with a note about squaring up later. 1 line, 1 account, 100%. My name was on page 4, and it was not on page 6. I read page 6 again, then page 4 again. Then I put them side by side on the screen. They did not want me to sell them my share. They wanted me to give it to them, and to do it on a Thursday between calls, on a scanned document with a sticker on it. In the 90 seconds, it takes a tired person to sign where the arrow says sign. And here is what took the wind out of me, and it is not the money. To send that document, my mother had to believe one specific thing about me. She had to believe I would not read past page 4. 19 years I have been reading. Feed tags, drug inserts, lab panels, insurance language, the fine print on a bull's registration papers. Reading carefully is not a thing I do. It is the job. She has known me for 44 years, and she thought I would sign on page 4. I did not reply. Not how dare you, not I need to think about it, nothing. I left it sitting there marked as read, which she would be able to see. Then I forwarded it, with the whole header, to a man named Elliot Vance. I had found him 2 days earlier through the state bar referral line, and I picked him for one reason: his office is in Columbia, 110 miles from Ballard, and he does not know anybody I am related to. Everybody in Hollis County knows everybody. I did not want a man who was going to call my mother a fine lady before he called me back. He called me Friday morning and we talked for 26 minutes. I am not going to sit here and explain the law to you, because I am a veterinarian and that is not my work. I will tell you the parts he said plainly enough that I wrote them down. He said the document I had been sent is the document you use when you already know you need 2 signatures. He said a closing agent handling a sale out of a trust asks for the trust instrument itself, reads it, and sees who is authorized to sign. And this is the sentence I underlined when a trust says both trustees. There is no version of a sale that works around one of them. Not slower, not harder, not at all. Then I asked him the question I had been carrying since Tuesday. I asked what happens if I go at this hard, if I take the whole file to the sheriff or to a court and make it a case. He did not tell me not to. I want to say that, because I think a lot of people expect a lawyer to talk you down, and he did not. He said if the trust is being administered improperly, there are avenues. Then he told me what it costs, and he was very matter-of-fact about it. He said it becomes a public file. He said it takes months, and probably longer than months. He said the ground sits under a cloud the entire time, which means nobody rents it right, nobody improves it, nobody can do anything with it. And he said, in his experience, families who go that route usually get the outcome and lose the thing. I asked him what the fast way was. He said, tell the auction company who you are. That was the whole answer. Tell them who you are, in writing, with the recorded document attached, and let the people whose job it is to check things, check them. I said I would think about it. He said, one more thing. Do not sign anything, and do not explain to your family why you are not signing. I asked him why not. He said, because right now they think this is going to be easy. Let them keep thinking that for a few more days. I found the auction company in 11 seconds. Message 44 had the name in it, Coil Land and Auction. There is one out of Chillicothe, and their listings page had the farm on it under the heading Upcoming, with a date, and the date was the Monday after Thanksgiving. 4 photographs, aerial of the ground with the boundary drawn on it in yellow, the lane, the east 80 from the road, and one of the buildings from the north, taken on a clear day, with the milk house in the corner of the frame. 250 to sell absolute, subject to seller confirmation. Bidding to open at $940,000. Under the description it said, held in trust. Clear title at closing. I wrote the email that night and sent it in the morning, because I have a rule about email after 9. I wrote it the way I write a field report to a producer I have never met. I gave the legal description and the recorded instrument number. I stated that I am one of 2 named trustees, and that the trust requires both trustee signatures for any conveyance or encumbrance of the real property. I stated that I had not been asked to sign anything and did not intend to. I attached the recorded pages and gave them my attorney's number. I read it 3 times and took out one sentence, the one that said I was sure this was an oversight. Because it was not an oversight, and I was not going to hand anybody that word to use later. Then I sent it and went out on calls. Janine Coyle rang me at 2:10 while I was standing in a lot at the Renwick place with a syringe in my teeth. She was polite in the way of somebody doing arithmetic while she talks. She confirmed she had the attachment. She asked me to confirm my name and my relationship to the trust. She asked whether I had been in contact with the other trustee about the sale. I said no. I said I had learned about it through other channels. There was a pause on the line, and I want to be fair to her, because it was not a nasty pause. It was the pause of a person who has just recognized a shape she has seen before. She said, "All right, I need to make some calls. Can I reach you at this number this evening?" She reached me at 6:40. She said their standard practice with any trust property is to review the trust instrument and confirm signing authority before the sale date, and that she had now done that, and that the instrument requires both trustees. She said, so the auction can't go forward as it's structured. She said it flatly, no sympathy in it, no drama in it, and I liked her enormously for that. Then she said, I have to notify the seller, and I have to pull the listing tonight. I said, that's fine. She said, and I'll be honest, we advertised these for 6 weeks. There are people who arranged financing to be at that sale. Pulling it 3 days out is not nothing. I said the only thing in that whole exchange that was not a fact. I said, I'm sorry. She said, don't be. I'd rather pull it now than have a title problem in January. Then she said one more thing, and I could hear her looking at something. Your name has been on this instrument for 9 years. Whoever gave us the paperwork gave us a copy that stops at page 2. I said, page 3 is the one that matters. She said, I know. I read it an hour ago. Then she hung up. And it was done. And I want to be honest about how it felt. It felt like nothing. I had expected a drop, relief, or some hot, ugly satisfaction, or at least the click you get when a bone goes back where it belongs. There was none of that. I stood in my kitchen holding a phone and the freezer hummed and outside a truck went by on the highway. I think it is because I had not done anything. I did not fight anybody. I sent a document to a professional and she read it. That document had been sitting in a county office for 9 years, waiting for one person to look at it. Walt did the work, in an afternoon, with a manila envelope under his arm. All I did was finally go get it. Bertie Sauls came by the clinic at 7. I have to say his name properly now, because so far he has been a hand off a combine wheel. And that is because for 3 weeks he was not part of this to me either. He is 66. He has farmed those 180 acres for 22 years. Since Walt's knees went and Walt started renting the ground out instead of working it. He drives a green pickup with a toolbox that does not match. His wife is Dot. He had a foil pan on the seat beside him. Dot had made 2 coffee cakes, and there is no version of the world in which 2 people eat 2 coffee cakes. He stood in the door of the clinic with his cap in his hand, the way he does. And he handed it over, and he asked whether the heifer at Ochoa's had made it. I said she had. I said the calf was up and sucking within the hour and that Cal had named him something ridiculous. He said, that's good. He did not mention the farm. He did not mention my mother. I know now that he already had a piece of paper in his kitchen drawer that he had been sitting on since July. And he did not bring it up that night, because it was not the right night and because Bertie Sauls does not hand a person 2 things at once. He asked about the weather Thursday. I said cold. He said, yep, put his cap back on, and went home. I ate a piece of that coffee cake standing at the counter, 4 days to Thanksgiving. And in the group chat, nobody had said one word. The chat woke up on Wednesday night. Not about the auction. Nobody said one word about the auction, which told me my mother had gotten the call and had decided to sit on it, the way she sits on everything, in the belief that a thing you have not told anybody is a thing that has not happened yet. Dale posted a photograph of the dining room. Table extended, leaf in, cloth on. Tessa sent hearts. My father sent a turkey. My mother wrote, "Don't forget, nobody brings up Colleen tomorrow. She thinks it's off. She thinks it's off." I read that from my couch with a cup of tea going cold in my hands. And upstairs somebody was playing music with the bass thudding through the ceiling. Slow, like something with a pulse. I did not sleep much. I got up at 6 because that is when I get up, made coffee, and sat down at the kitchen table with the phone face up. The chat had been going since 7. Tessa, happy Thanksgiving with a tree. Dale, morning all. My father sent a sticker of a pilgrim, which I am fairly sure he did not mean to send. At 8:19, my mother posted a photograph of the table set. I want to describe it the way I saw it, because I did not see it the way a daughter sees a table. 4 plates. The good white ones with the thin gold ring. 4 glasses. 4 napkins folded into triangles. 4 chairs pushed in square to the cloth. 2 candles. Not lit yet. The leaf was in the table, which meant the table was at its full length, and at its full length that table seats 8, and they had set 4 places in the middle of it and left the ends bare. I counted them the way I count a dose, twice, out loud, with my finger on the screen. 4. Then I went and got the draft. I had written it 11 days earlier and rewritten it maybe 20 times, and every version got shorter, because every version I read back sounded like a woman explaining herself. Explaining is what you do when you think you might be wrong. I did not need one word of explanation. I needed a direction. At 9:48 in the morning I sent it. Happy Thanksgiving. Ask the auction company why Monday is off. Then I set the phone down on the table. Screen up. And I put my hands flat on either side of it. And I waited. The typing bubble came up under Tessa's name. It went away. It came up under my mother's name. It went away. It came up under Dale's and stayed for 11 seconds, which is a long time, and then it went away too. Nobody sent anything. The chat that had been full of pilgrims and hearts 4 minutes earlier went completely silent, and it stayed silent. And I sat there and watched the little bubbles come and go 6 more times while nobody typed a word. That is the part I have thought about most. They were not silent because they had nothing to say. They were silent because there was nothing in my message to argue with. I had not accused anybody. I had not raised my voice. I had given them no account of where any of it came from. I had pointed them at a woman in Chillicothe who had a document in front of her and no reason on earth to protect them. You cannot fight a direction. You can only follow it. 2 hours. That is how long it took. And I know because as I wrote down when it started the way I write down when a fever breaks. At 11:48 the phone started and did not stop. I opened the Notes app because I am who I am. And I made 4 lines and I kept a tally. Tessa, 21 calls. My mother, 34. Dale, 9. My father, 2 calls and 1 text that said 3 words, call your mother. 66 calls in 2 hours. From 4 people who had not put my name on a place setting. Tessa left a message I played once. Her voice was high and fast, and she said, "What does that mean? What auction company? Colleen, please, please call me." My mother left one at 12:15. I have played it more than once, and not because it hurt, because of the grammar. She said, "Whatever you think happened. Pick up the phone. We handle our own business in this family. Do not turn this into one of your things. One of your things." The woman who moved a holiday to keep me out of a building had a category for me, and she used it out loud, on a recording, at 12:15 on Thanksgiving Day. I did not call any of them back for 3 hours. I made a sandwich. I fed the cat. I went out and started my truck because it was 14 degrees and it needed to run. At 2:40 I called my mother, one time, and she answered on half a ring. She said, "Colleen, what have you done?" Speaker. I could hear the room. Tessa saying something to somebody with her hand over her mouth, a chair going back on a floor. Good. I wanted the room. I told her the facts in order. In the voice I use with a producer at 3 a.m. when a thing has gone wrong and panicking is not available to either of us, I said. A listing agent reviewing a trust property pulls the trust and checks who can sign. She checked. The instrument requires 2 trustees. She stopped the sale. That is her job, and she would have done it in December whether I called her or not. My mother said, "You have blown this family apart." I let that go past. Then I said the 2 things I had come to say. I said, "You told me it was cancelled." Again. And then, into the room. Into all of them. "You sent the auction company 2 pages. 3 is the one with my name on it." She did not answer that. Nobody in that room answered that. I said my attorney's name, and his number, and I said everything about the ground goes through him now. Then I wished them a good Thanksgiving. And I meant it, and I hung up. That was where I thought this ended. A sale stopped. A sister exposed. 66 calls I did not take. If you have made it this far with me, you have probably been doing arithmetic on your own family while I talked. Who would notice? Who only calls when something needs signing? I see you, and I am not going to tell you what to do about it. Stay with me, because the next part is the part nobody warned me about, and subscribe so it finds you. The phone rang again while it was still warm in my hand. Not one of them. Bertie Sowles. He said, "I hate to call you today of all days." I said it was fine. He said, "Do you know anything about a new lease on that ground?" I said I did not. And he said, "Well, I got a letter in July." July. 5 months before anybody typed my name into a group chat by mistake. He was at my back door at 7 the next morning with his cap in his hand. I had told him on the phone to come in the morning, because I was not going to look at a piece of paper about that ground at 4 in the afternoon on Thanksgiving with a plate of nothing in front of me. He would not sit down. He stood on the mat with the cold coming off his jacket, and he took a folded envelope out of his inside pocket and held it out with both hands. The way you hand somebody a document you have decided is theirs. It had been folded and unfolded so many times the creases had gone furry. Notice of termination of farm lease. Effective at the end of the current crop year. Signed, Marilyn R., Dorsey, trustee. Dated the 9th of June. I read it twice. Then I looked at the date again. Because the date was the thing. June. The chat came in November. The auction was set for the Monday after Thanksgiving. The consent document had been sent to me 8 days ago, and the letter in my hand was from June. I said, "When did you get this?" He said, "Mid-July sometime." I said, "Bertie, that's 4 months." And he said the thing that has stayed with me longer than anything my own family said in this entire business. He said, "I figured you all had talked it over." He was not being pointed. That is what makes it sit in me. He genuinely believed that a family whose ground he had farmed for 22 years would have discussed among themselves what to do with it, and that if the daughter had not called him, it was because the daughter agreed, and that it was not his place to come around asking a woman why she had made a decision about her own land. He said, I didn't want to be the one making trouble. Then he asked if I wanted him to keep going through harvest or stop, because he had beans out yet and he did not want to leave me in a bind. And I want you to hold on to that sentence. The man who had just been fired off his own livelihood was standing on my back step worried about leaving me in a bind. I need to tell you who Bertie Sowles is to that place, because otherwise the rest of this is just paperwork. Walt farmed it himself until his knees went at 68. Then he did what men out here do, which is he found somebody he trusted and rented it to him rather than watch strangers run over the tile. That was Bertie, 22 years ago. They never signed anything longer than 1 year. Not once. In 22 years. Every February, one of them would call the other and they would agree on a number, and that was the lease. When Walt got sick the last time, Bertie put the crop in and never sent a bill for anything he did around the buildings. And after the funeral, he called my mother, and he has paid rent to the trust every year since, on time. Without a contract that ran longer than a calendar. I asked him once why they never wrote it down for longer. He said Walt told him a long lease is what you use when you do not trust somebody to be fair to you next year. That is the man who was standing on my step. I asked him if he had heard anything about who was taking it over. He said he did not know a name. He said the fella who came out to walk the fence in the fall had said something about it being a package with some other ground. And Bertie had not pushed. I said, "What fella?" He said, drove a white truck, had a plat map, put a stake in down by the culvert. And there it was, the orange ribbon. The stake I had photographed out of pure habit on a Tuesday in November and then not thought about again. Because at the time it was a piece of wood in a fence line and I did not have anywhere to file it. I asked him what the man looked like. He said he had not gotten close enough. He said it was a white truck. No lettering. Dale's truck is white. Dale's truck has Pike grading on the door in green. So that was not Dale. Or that was a different day. I wrote both of those down. And I want to be honest that I wrote them down in the wrong order, with the second one underneath and no star next to it. Because at that moment I was building a case about a lease and not about a man. Before he left, I asked him what he was paying. He told me I asked him to say it again, because I thought I had heard him wrong. And he said it again. And then he said, "It's a fair number for what it was when we started. And I've never asked for a break." I said, "Bertie, that is not what you are paying now." And he said, "No, that's what I'm paying now. That's what the new one says." I said, "What new one?" He said, "The one they wanted me to sign in August. The one I didn't." Then he put his cap back on and he said he would leave the beans standing until I told him different. And he went down the steps and got in the green pickup and drove out. I stood in the open door with the heat going out of the house and a letter dated the 9th of June in my hand. I had spent 3 weeks believing this thing started in November. It did not start in November. It started before the corn was knee-high. The new lease was on file at the county, because leases of that length get recorded. And that is how I read it on the Friday after Thanksgiving, sitting in my truck outside the courthouse with the engine running. 10 years, not 1, 10. $70 an acre? Bertie had been paying $185, which is a fair number for that dirt in that township. Which I know because I stand in those fields 9 months a year and I hear what everybody pays. $70 an acre on 180 acres is $12,600 a year. At the going rate, it is $33,300. The difference is $20,700 a year, and the lease runs a decade, and it was signed on the 9th of June by one trustee. The tenant named on it was a man called Wade Pruitt, out of the next county over. I did not know him. I sat in the truck and worked out that I did not know him. And then I called Elliot Vance from the courthouse parking lot and read him the whole thing over the phone, line by line, while he did not interrupt me once. When I finished, he asked me 2 questions. He asked whether the trust required both trustees for a lease, or only for a sale or an encumbrance. I read him the paragraph again: sale, conveyance, mortgage, deed of trust, or other encumbrance. He said, "All right." Then he said something I did not expect, which is that a long-term lease at below market can be argued either way, and that a lawyer for the other side would say, a lease is not a conveyance, and that a lawyer on my side would say a 10-year lease at 38% of market is not a lease. It is a transfer of value with a lease stapled to the front of it. Then he asked his second question, and this is the one that mattered. He asked, "What does that lease do to what the ground is worth?" I said I did not know. He said, "It comes off the price. A buyer at auction is not just buying dirt. He is buying dirt with a tenant on it at $70 for 10 years, and he bids what that is worth to him, which is less. Sometimes a great deal less. I sat there in the parking lot with the heater on my hands. Let me lay it out the way I finally laid it out on a piece of paper on my kitchen table that night. Because this is the part where the whole shape of it turned over. In June, one trustee signed a 10-year lease at less than half the going rate to a man from the next county. In September and October, an auction company advertised the ground for 6 weeks. In November, the family arranged a holiday around keeping me out of it and sent me a consent form with a sticker on page 4. If the auction had gone through, the ground sells low because of the lease. The proceeds go to one account because of page 6. And I get nothing because I signed page 4 without reading page 6. But suppose I had read it. Suppose I had said no. The way I finally did. Then what then? The ground does not sell. And I am a co-owner of 180 acres that is locked into a decade of income at $70 an acre. I cannot get it back. I cannot rent it right. I cannot do anything with it but hold it and watch it earn a third of what it should. Which makes selling my half look reasonable. Which makes selling it cheap look reasonable. That is what I understood in a courthouse parking lot on the day after Thanksgiving. And it went through me like cold water. The lease was not carelessness. The lease was not a favor to a friend of the family. The lease was the fallback plan. If I signed, they got the money. If I did not sign, they got the land hollowed out until I would take any offer to be rid of it. Somebody had thought 2 moves ahead. Somebody had thought about what happens if the reasonable one turns out not to be reasonable. And I want to be honest with you about the next thing that went through my head, because it was not clean and it does not make me look good. I thought my mother did not think of this. I have known that woman for 44 years. She is careful about appearances and she is very good at arranging a room. She has never in her life thought 2 moves ahead about a financial instrument. She could not tell you what a below-market lease does to an appraisal, because she has never once had to know. Somebody drafted that lease. Somebody found Wade Pruitt. Somebody walked the fence line in a white truck with a plat map and put a stake in by the culvert in the fall. And her name was the one on the signature line. I sat with that for about a minute. Then I did what I always do with a thought I cannot support, which is that I put it in the back of the book and I went back to what I could prove. What I could prove was this: on the 9th of June, my mother terminated a 22-year tenant and replaced him for a decade at a number that only makes sense if the point was not the rent. I drove home. I dug out a roll of butcher paper from the clinic supply closet, taped 4 feet of it to the front of my refrigerator, and started a timeline the way I chart a herd outbreak. Date on the left, event on the right, source in the margin. The first entry was June 9th. I remember thinking, standing there with a marker in my hand, that I was finally doing the thing my grandfather told me to do in a kitchen when I was 25 and did not understand him. Quit trying to teach them. Start writing it down. There were 3 vehicles in the drive when I got to my mother's house on Sunday. I had called and said I was coming by. I had said it plainly, no agenda in my voice, because I wanted one conversation with her about a piece of paper. I did not get one conversation with her. I got a room, Tessa's car, Dale's white truck, the one with Pike grating on the door in green, and my father's, which does not go many places. I sat in the drive for a second with my hands on the wheel. I want to describe the kitchen because I grew up in it, and because everything in it was where it has always been. The wall clock with the rooster, the canister set, the window over the sink that looks out at the propane tank and past it to the road. They were already sitting. Coffee already made. My mother had a cup out for me before I got my coat off, and she made it the way I take it, black with 1 sugar, which she has known since I was 19. I want you to understand how good that is. That is not calculation. That is a woman who genuinely knows how her daughter takes her coffee, doing a kind thing, in a room she has arranged so that the kind thing will land first. She said, "Sit down, honey. Let's all just talk." Then she talked for 11 minutes. I timed it, because I have a habit now, and because after about the third minute I understood that I was not in a conversation. I was in a presentation, and the presentation had been rehearsed. The story she told went like this: that she and Tessa had been carrying the burden of the place for years while I lived my own life, that the taxes and the upkeep had fallen on them, that everybody had agreed the ground should be sold while the market was good, that I had been hard to reach, that nobody had wanted to bother me during calving, that the whole thing had been handled the way it had been handled out of consideration for me, and that now, because of a phone call to an auction company, Tessa and Dale might lose their house. I let all 11 minutes run. I did not interrupt once. I want to tell you what it is like to sit in a room and be told the story of your own life by people who were there for a different one. It is not rage. Rage would have been easier. It is a kind of vertigo, because every individual sentence is almost true. I did live my own life. I am hard to reach in March. Nobody did want to bother me. If you take those 3 true things and set them next to each other in the right order, you can build a version of the last 9 years in which I am the one who left. The only thing missing from her account was the 9th of June, and the 9th of June was in my coat pocket. Tessa cried at minute 7. She said, "We were going to tell you." She said, "You don't know what this year has been like." Dale said one thing the entire time. He waited until my mother had finished, and then he leaned forward with his elbows on his knees and said, "For what it's worth, Colleen, I told them this was a bad way to do it. You should have been at the table from the start." It was the only fair sentence spoken in that kitchen in 11 minutes. My mother did not like it. She said his name, once, in a tone. He put his hands up a little and said, "I'm just saying she's not wrong to be upset." I looked at him and I thought, well, at least one of them can see it. I want you to remember that I thought that. I want you to remember exactly how it felt, because it felt like relief. And relief is a very expensive thing to feel in a room like that. Then I took the letter out of my coat and put it on the table. I did not say anything about the auction. I did not say anything about page 4 or page 6 or the woman in Chillicothe. I asked one question. I said, "What's the rent on this new lease?" My mother looked at it for a second. Then she said, She said, "That's just the lease. Bertie was getting on in years and Wade came recommended." I said, "What's the rent?" She said she did not have that in front of her. She said she would have to look. She said Dale had handled the paperwork end of it because she does not do well with all that. And I watched my sister's face when she said Dale's name. Tessa looked at her husband, not at my mother, not at the letter, at Dale, fast, and then away, and then down at her coffee. It was less than a second. If I had been anywhere else in that room, I would have missed it. I have watched animals my whole working life, and there is a thing a cow does with her head when the noise she is afraid of is not the noise everybody else is looking at. It is not fear of the thing in front of her. It is checking on the thing behind her. That is what my sister's face did. At the time, I filed it as guilt. She was embarrassed. Her husband had done the paperwork. They were in trouble. She could not look at him. I wrote it in the truck afterward under the heading Tessa, and I wrote 4 words, looked at Dale first. 4 words. No star, no underline. 3/4 of the way down a page about a lease. My mother said, "Sweetheart, it is $70. And it is not what you think, and everything out here is renting soft this year." That was the second lie I could prove. Nothing in Hollis County rented soft that year. Nothing. I put my cup in the sink. Because you put your cup in the sink in that house, and I said I would be in touch through my attorney. And I got my coat. My mother followed me out to the porch, and in the cold, in a voice I had never heard her use, she said, "You have no idea what I am holding up. I did not find out from a stranger. That is the part I would change if I could change one thing. The first Sunday in December there was a soup supper at the Methodist Church in Ballard. I am not a member. I go about 4 times a year. At the suppers, because half my clients are in that basement and because a woman who works alone in a truck ought to sit in a room with people once in a while, I came in through the side door by the coat rack, which is what you do if you are late, and I stopped in the little hallway to get my boots off, and I could hear the kitchen through the open pass-through. My mother was in there with 2 women from the altar guild. I want to be careful here. I am going to tell you what she said, and I am not going to dress it up. She said, "Oh, we're managing. It's been hard. You know Colleen has always been sensitive." One of the other women said something I did not catch. And my mother said, "She's built the whole thing up in her head. She always has since she was little. You cannot say anything to her without it becoming a matter. And now she's got a lawyer involved over a piece of paper. And it's her sister's house on the line. And I just pray she calms down before somebody loses everything." Then somebody laughed, not unkindly, the way you laugh when a woman you have known 30 years tells you her cross is heavy. And my mother said, "Well, you raise them the same and they come out different." I stood in that hallway with one boot off. I want to tell you what I did. Because I have been asked, and because the answer disappoints people. I put my boot back on, and I went out the side door, and I drove home. I did not walk into that kitchen. I have thought about it 1,000 times since, and I would do it the same way again. And here is why. If I had walked in, what would it have looked like? A 44-year-old woman comes around the corner of a church kitchen, in front of the altar guild, and starts explaining about trustee signatures and lease rates to 2 women holding a ladle. There is no version of that where I do not become exactly the thing she just said I was. That is what the word is for. That is the whole function of it. I had never understood that until I was standing in a hallway in my socks. I had spent my life thinking sensitive was an insult. It is not an insult. It is a tool. It is a very good one. And it works like this. It gets installed early, so that everyone has the word ready before there is anything to use it on. Then anytime I notice something that is actually happening, the word is already waiting, and it does 2 jobs at once. It explains why I noticed, and it explains why what I noticed is not real, and the terrible part, the part I did not see until that night, is that it works best on the person it is used on. After enough years, you stop needing anybody to say it. You say it yourself. You count 4 chairs in a photograph, and then you tell yourself you are being dramatic, and you throw your sandwich wrapper away and go back to work. I got home and I sat in my kitchen with my coat still on for a while. Then I did 2 things. The first thing was that I wrote it on the butcher paper. Date, first Sunday in December. And in the right-hand column, 6 words, told church she is sensitive. Lawyer. It seems petty, and it was not. Up to that night, everything on that wall was paper, recorded documents, a lease, a letter, an email. Paper is honest, but paper is slow. A woman in a church kitchen is not slow. If she was saying it there, she had been saying it elsewhere. And elsewhere in a county this size means the co-op, the elevator, the feed store, the counter at the parts house, which meant this was no longer about 180 acres. The second thing I did was stand in front of that paper and understand that I could not answer it. That is the thing about being talked about. There is no procedure. There is no office you can call. There is no document you can attach that says my mother is telling people I am unwell. For 3 weeks I had been operating on the assumption that I was in a fight about ownership. And ownership is a category where I hold every card. What was starting now was a fight about reputation. And in a fight about reputation, the person with the most mouths wins. And my mother has known everybody in Hollis County since she was a school secretary, and she has known most of them since they were 9. I have 1 truck and a telephone. I did not sleep well that night either. It was the first night in the whole business where I was frightened. And it was not about the land. I sat up around 2 and did the arithmetic on my own practice, which I had never once had to do. 61% of my income comes from 11 operations. All 11 of them are within 22 miles of that church basement. 9 of the 11 have somebody in the family who was at the supper that night. I do not have a contract with any of them. Nobody does out here. You have a relationship. And the relationship is that when it goes bad at 2 in the morning, they call your number instead of the number in Chillicothe. That is the entire business. That is the whole thing. And it can be taken apart one kitchen at a time by a woman who does not have to say a single provable untrue thing, because she does not need to prove anything. She only needs to be sad about me in front of enough people. The Renwick call came on the 11th of December. Gary Renwick has a cow-calf operation, 240 head north end of the county. I have done his herd work for 14 years. I preg-check his cows in the fall and I do his bull exams in the spring, and I have been in his corral at every hour a clock has... He called me at 4 in the afternoon, which is a strange time for him. He said he was going to go a different direction on the herd contract this year. I said, all right. I asked if something had gone wrong. He said no. He said it 3 times, actually, which is how I knew. He said, we're just looking at some things. I asked if I could ask who he was going with. He said he had not decided. And then he said a name, which meant he had decided. The man he named practices out of Chillicothe. He is competent. He is also 51 miles from Gary Renwick's corral, which in a February blizzard at 2 in the morning is not a distance. It is a decision about whether a calf lives. I said, Gary, if I've done something, I'd rather you told me. There was a long pause on that line, and I could hear him outside. Wind on the phone. He said, Colleen, I'd just as soon stay out of family business. Family business. That is the whole conversation. That is what it sounds like. Nobody accuses you of anything. Nobody gives you a chance to answer, because there is no charge. I sat in the truck for a while after that one. The second one I did not even get a call about. The Lundgren place put a herd health day on the calendar in January, and did not call me for it. And I found out because their hired man mentioned it to me at the elevator, casually, assuming I knew. Then in the 3rd week of December, the County Cattlemen's Association printed its winter roster, which is a folded card that goes up in every parts house and feed store in the county, with the emergency numbers on the back. For 11 years, my name and my cell number have been on the back of that card. 2nd line. That year there were 2 names on it. Mine was not one of them. Nobody voted. There was no meeting. Somebody reprinted a card. I want to be exact about what this does to a practice like mine, because from the outside it sounds like hurt feelings. 61% of my income comes from 11 operations. I lost 2 of the 11 inside of 3 weeks. Between them, that is about 19% of my year. But the number is not the wound. The number I could survive. What I could not survive is the other thing, which is that in a county this size, a herd contract does not move quietly. When Gary Renwick goes to Chillicothe for his fall work, every man at that elevator knows inside a week, and not one of them knows why. And so each of them makes up a reason, and the reason they make up will be the one that is already available. She has always been sensitive. She got a lawyer involved. There is something going on with the Dorseys. I had one conversation in that period that I will keep. Priya came into the office the 3rd week of December and sat down on the corner of my desk, which she does not do, and said, I took the 2 overnights this weekend. I said she did not have to. She said, I know I don't have to. Then she said, whatever this is, you look like a woman who has not slept since Thanksgiving, and I am not going to ask you about it. And I am also not going to let you do the Kavanaugh calving check on 4 hours. Then she left. That is the whole scene. It took 90 seconds. I sat at that desk afterward and put my hands over my face for a minute. And it was the first time in 5 weeks that anything got through. Here is what I want to say about that stretch of December. And then I will move on. Because I have promised you I would not circle. I was not frightened when I read 62 messages in a truck. I was not frightened when I read a consent form with a sticker on page 4. I was cold, and I was clear, and I was working. I got frightened on the 11th of December on a phone call about a herd contract, because up to that point everything they had done was to a thing I own. 180 acres is a possession. I did not grow up on it. I do not live on it. If it burned to the dirt, I would grieve it the way you grieve a photograph. What was happening now was to the only thing I have ever actually built. 19 years of 2 in the mornings. 19 years of being the one who answers. That is not property. That is not on a recorded instrument in Hollis County. There is no page 3 anywhere in the world with my name on it that says, Colleen Dorsey is the person you call. That gets built one call at a time, and it can be taken apart the same way. And there is no document you can attach to an email to stop it. That was the week I understood that my mother had chosen her ground better than I had. I had been fighting on paper, where I hold everything. She had moved the fight to a place where paper does not go. I stopped answering the second week of January. Not answering people. Answering the thing. Up to then, everything I had done had been a response. Somebody sent me a document. I read it. Somebody ended a lease. I looked it up. Somebody talked in a church kitchen. I stood in a hallway with one boot off. That is how you lose. And it took me until January to see it. And what finally showed me was a heifer. The Kavanaugh place had a 2-year-old that had been off for 8 days. Nothing dramatic. Slightly slow to the bunk. A half degree of temperature that came and went. And one morning she stood with her back roached up for about a minute and then quit. The owner had a story for every single one of those. She got bumped at the gate. The feed changed. The weather turned. None of it was wrong. That is what people do not understand. Every single explanation he gave me was a real thing that really happened. He was not lying. He was doing what everybody does, which is to hand you a reason for each fact separately so that no 2 facts ever have to sit in the same room. So I quit listening to the reasons and I put every single thing on one sheet in order of date. Temperature, appetite, posture, manure, what she weighed on the 12th, what she weighed on the 20th. Once they are in a column and not in a conversation. It took about 9 seconds. Hardware. She had eaten a piece of wire out of a bale sometime around Christmas, and it was working its way through her. I drove home and I stood in front of 4 feet of butcher paper taped to my refrigerator, and I thought I have been letting them hand me the facts one at a time. So I did it properly. I want to walk you through what I actually asked for, because people always imagine there was some brilliant move. And there was not. It was clerical work. I asked Elliot Vance for one thing every instrument recorded against that legal description in the last 5 years. Not the last 5 months, not the trust. Everything. Every filing. Every release. Every affidavit. Whatever a search turns up. I called the county extension office and asked for the published cash rent survey for the district for the last 3 years, which is public and which anybody can have for the asking, and which I had never once looked at in my life because I did not need to. I called the auction company back, and Janine Coyle sent me the marketing package that had been prepared in September, which included the aerial, the soil productivity index, and the sheet a bidder would have been handed at the sale. And I asked Bertie for 2 things: the letter he had already given me, and a copy of the lease he was asked to sign in August and did not. He brought it up himself the next morning. He had it in the same drawer. The August draft is important, and I will tell you why in one sentence. It is the same document as the recorded June lease, with the same tenant named on it, and a different number. The one they wanted Bertie to sign in August was $140 an acre for 1 year. The one recorded in June was $70 an acre for 10. Both existed. Both were prepared by the same hand, which meant that in August, somebody was still trying to make it look ordinary. And in June, the actual instrument had already been recorded, and the 2 were never meant to sit next to each other on a table. I taped them side by side on the refrigerator. The extension survey went up next to them. Cash rent for that district 3 years running, in a range, in print, from an office with no dog in this fight. The lowest number on it for good cropland was 162. That is what I mean by doing it properly. I did not have to prove that $70 was a betrayal. I only had to put $70 next to a printed page that says what the ground rent's for, and let the two numbers stand there together in a kitchen. The recorded search came back from Elliot on the 17th of January. It ran 9 pages. Most of it was nothing. The original deed into the trust. A right-of-way for the rural water district from before I was born. A release of an old note of my grandfather's from 2006. And one entry I did not understand. An instrument recorded 2 years ago in September. Not a lease, not a deed. The index line described it as a power of attorney. And it named the trust. And it named the legal description. And the party granting it was listed as Colleen A. Dorsey. I read that line 4 times. 2 years ago in September, I had granted somebody the power to act for me on that ground. I had no memory of it whatsoever. Now, I want to be honest about what I thought, because what I thought was not a twist. What I thought was, I have signed a great many things in 19 years. And I signed fast. And I have absolutely put my name on documents in a truck cab with a pen that was running out. And it is entirely possible that at some point, somebody in this family put a form in front of me, and I signed it without reading and forgot. That is what I thought. That was the reasonable explanation, and I sat with it for most of a day, but I put a yellow highlighter across it anyway, and I wrote 3 words in the margin. Order the copy. Then I went back to the lease, because the lease was the fight I was in. And the highlighted line sat on the refrigerator for 11 days while I fought it. My father called me on the 22nd of January. I need you to understand that this had not happened in 11 years. Ray Dorsey does not call. He is not cold, and he is not angry. He is absent in a way that took me until my 30s to name properly. He drove a grain truck for the co-op for 31 years, and he came home and he sat in his chair, and if you asked him a question, he answered it accurately in as few words as possible. When my mother was building one of her cases about somebody, he read the paper. When my grandfather told her at that kitchen table that the trust was filed, my father was in the room and he did not look up. I have never once heard him take a side. Not against me, not for me either. So when his name came up on my phone at 7 in the evening, I answered it thinking somebody had died. He said, "You busy?" I said, "No." He said, "You eat?" I said, "Not yet." He said, "I'm at the Dutchman." The Dutchman is a truck stop diner on the highway 11 miles out of Ballard. Vinyl booths, pie under a plastic dome. It is where you go when you do not want to be in a house. I got there in 20 minutes. He had coffee in front of him and had not ordered. We talked about the weather, we talked about my truck, which is going to need tires again. He asked how the practice was, and I said it was fine, and he did not ask a second time. And I have thought since about whether that was tact or whether he did not want to hear the answer. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "That book your grandpa kept out in the milk house. Did he write in that thing right up to the end?" I said, "Yes." He said, "All of it." "Every day?" I said, "Most days. Not every day." He turned his cup a quarter turn on the table. I said, "Dad." "Why?" And he said, "No reason." Then he said, "Wondered if your mother ever went through it." I said I did not think anybody had touched it in 4 years. He said, "Huh." And that was the end of that. He asked about a dog we had when I was a kid. He talked for 6 or 7 minutes about a man he used to haul with. Then he paid for 2 coffees and a slice of pie that neither of us ate, and we went out to the parking lot. And standing between our trucks in the cold, I said the thing I have wanted to say to that man for about 25 years, and I said it badly, which is the only way I was ever going to say it. I said, "I'm not angry at you for what you did." He didn't say anything. I said, "I'm angry because you never did anything. Not once. She'd start in on somebody and you'd read the paper. Grandpa put my name on that trust in front of you and you didn't look up." He stood there with his hands in his coat pockets. "I want to tell you what I expected. I expected an explanation. I expected the thing men his age say, which is that it was not his place, that it was her family, that he stayed out of it to keep the peace. He did not say any of that. He said, 'That's right,' 2 words. He looked at the ground when he said it. Then, with his hand already on the door, he said one more thing, and he said it to the truck and not to me. He said, 'I've still got your grandpa's old phone in the drawer. Never could get the thing to come on.' And then he got in and shut the door. I want to be honest that I drove home furious. Furious in a way I had not been the whole winter. Not at my mother, not at Tessa, not at any of the paperwork. Because there is something in a man agreeing with you that closes the door harder than an argument does. You cannot push against it." He handed me the whole thing and kept walking. It took me 2 days to get to the other side of it, and when I did I wrote 3 lines on the butcher paper, and here they are. 1. He asked about the ledger. 2. Nobody in this family has asked about the ledger in 4 years. 3. He drove 11 miles in January to a truck stop to ask a question he could have asked on the phone in 8 seconds. I looked at those 3 lines for a long time. A man who never says anything does not develop curiosity about his father-in-law's farm records at 74 for no reason. He did not tell me anything. I want to be precise about that, because he has been given credit since by people who like a story with a nice arc in it. He did not tell me anything. He did not warn me. He did not hand me a document. He sat in a truck stop and turned his cup a quarter turn and asked one question about a book on a shelf. That is the whole size of what my father was able to do. I have made my peace with the size of it. I did not go out to the milk house that week. That is the part that still bothers me. I had a lease fight in front of me, and a co-op meeting coming, and a herd contract gone. And a question about an old ledger went to the bottom of the list. Underneath a highlighted line about a power of attorney, I could not remember signing. 2 things sat on that refrigerator for 11 days, 3 feet apart, and I did not put them together. They were the same thing. The co-op annual meeting is the first Tuesday in February, in the fellowship hall behind the Methodist church, because the co-op does not have a room big enough. Around 110 people. Coffee in a percolator the size of a water heater, folding chairs, a card table at the front with 3 men from the board, and a woman who takes the minutes. I have gone to that meeting every year for 19 years. Nobody expected anything of me at that one. I am not on the board. I am on the roll because Walt put the trust's membership in my name and my mother's when he set it up, and I have voted at that meeting exactly 0 times. My mother was there. She sat in the 4th row with 2 women from the altar guild. I sat in the back on the aisle. Because I always do, because I have twice had to leave a meeting for a calving. They ran the ordinary business for 50 minutes. Fuel contracts. A grain bin they are going to have to reskin. Election of 1 board seat. Uncontested. Then they got to the item about ground leased through the co-op's farm management service, which is a small side of the business, 4 or 5 parcels, and the woman taking minutes read the list. Legal description. Acres, tenant of record, term. When she got to ours, she read it out the way she read all the others, in the same flat voice. 180 acres. Tenant of record. Wade Pruitt, term, 10 years. Then she went on to the next one. I stood up. I want to tell you what was in my hands because it matters. I had 1 page, not the file, not the folder, not the timeline off the refrigerator. 1 page. Which was the Extension Service cash rent survey for our district, printed off the internet, free, available to any human being with a library card, I said. Before you move on. My name is Colleen Dorsey. I am one of 2 trustees on that ground. The room got quiet in the particular way a room gets quiet when it has been waiting. I said, I did not sign that lease. And under the trust, it takes both trustees. I would like it in the minutes that I have not consented to it, and that I will not be renewing it. One of the board members, a man named Halverson, who has known me since I was in 4-H, said, All right. Colleen, we can note that. And then he said the thing I did not plan for, and I have gone back and forth for a long time about whether he did it on purpose. He said, What's the rent on it? I could have said I would rather not get into it. I said, $70 an acre. There was a sound in that room, not a gasp, nothing that dramatic. It was about 40 men and women making a small noise at the same time. The noise you make when a number lands wrong, and then a chair creaking, and then somebody in the third row from the back said, out loud to nobody, 70. And a man near the door said, I'm paying 2.25 on ground that ain't as good as that. And that was it. That was the whole thing. I did not say another word. I sat down. I want to be very clear about what I did and did not do in that room, because it is the difference between this story and a different kind of story. I did not say my mother's name. I did not say she had done it behind my back. I did not say what she had told the Altar Guild. I did not say anything about Thanksgiving, or an auction, or a document with a sticker on page 4. I did not say she had ended a 22-year tenant by letter in June. I said a number, because a man asked me a number, and the number was true. 110 people did the subtraction themselves. That is the entire mechanism. And it took 19 seconds. And it cannot be taken back, because nobody can accuse you of saying an ugly thing about your mother when the only thing that came out of your mouth was $70 an acre. My mother did not stand up. I watched the back of her head from 6 rows behind, and she did not turn around, not once, for the remaining 18 minutes of that meeting. She sat very straight. At the end, when everybody stood and started folding chairs and going for the coffee, she got her purse and her coat, and she went out the front, past the card table, saying good evening to the woman taking minutes, with her chin up, and she did not look at anybody. I have thought about that walk a great deal. There is a version of me that enjoyed it. I am not going to pretend there is not. I sat in a folding chair and watched my mother walk the length of a room she has been the queen of since before I was born, and part of me was glad. But most of what I felt was something with no good name for it, because I know what she was doing on that walk. She was doing the thing she has done her whole life, which is to hold a face on straight while the floor goes out. She did it at her mother's funeral. She did it the year the school cut her hours. She did it in that kitchen when Walt said the paper was filed. I learned it from her. That is the part. Everything I did that winter, the level voice, the facts in order, not raising anything I learned in that house. From that woman, watching her hold her face on straight. Bertie was standing by the coffee urn when I came up the aisle. He did not say anything about it. He said Dot had been asking after me and did I want to come out Sunday. I said I would. She was waiting in the parking lot, not by her car, by mine, with her coat buttoned wrong at the top, standing in the cold in the dark between 2 trucks. She said, Come to the house. So I followed her 4 miles and I sat down in that kitchen for the second time in 10 weeks. And this time it was the 2 of us and the rooster clock. She cried inside of 90 seconds. I want to describe that first round of crying accurately, because I have been accused since of being hard about it, and I am going to be hard about it. It arrived on schedule. It arrived at the point in the conversation where it always arrives, which is immediately before any content, so that everything that comes after it has to be said to a woman who is crying. She said, Do you have any idea what you did to me in that room? She said, Those are my friends. Halverson's wife and I have been on the flower committee for 20 years. She said, I will never be able to walk into that hall again. I did not say anything for a while. Then I asked her one question, and I asked it in the flattest voice I own. I said, What did you call me in the church kitchen on the first Sunday in December? She stopped. That is the thing about a woman who has been running the same 3-step for 40 years. The steps assume the other person is trying to be heard. If you do not want anything from her, the machinery has nothing to catch on. She said, I don't know what you mean. I said, yes, you do. There were 3 of you and a pass-through window, and I was standing in the hall taking my boots off. She looked at the table, and then the second crying came. It was not the same. I want to be careful, because I know how this sounds. But I have spent 19 years telling the difference between an animal that is protesting and an animal that is in trouble. And the difference is not volume. It is that the first one is watching you, and the second one is not. She was not watching me. She said, I am 71 years old. She said, I signed my name to that boy's equipment note in the spring of the year before last, and I did not tell your father. And if that company goes down, they come for my house. Not Tessa's. Mine. The house I have lived in since 1979. She said, and I have got $14,000 and a Social Security check. And that is all I have got. And everybody in this county thinks I am comfortable because I keep the yard nice. I sat there. I want to tell you what happened in my chest, because it surprised me. I believed her. All of it. Every word of that was true, and it explained a great deal, and none of it was an excuse. And both of those things were sitting in the room at the same time, and neither one canceled the other. She was not a monster. She was a frightened old woman who got into something she did not understand. And then she looked around at her family for the cheapest way out of it, and she found me, not because she hated me, because I was the one who would cost the least. That is what I finally understood in that kitchen. Out of everyone at that table, I was the one you could take from without a fight. Because I had spent 44 years demonstrating exactly that, with every furnace and every roof and every 9 days off in the middle of breeding season. I had trained her. That is the part I do not say out loud very often. She said, I never meant for you to find out that way. I said, that's true, you meant for me not to find out. She said, that is not fair. And then she said, Colleen, you know I have never been able to talk to you the way I talk to your sister. And there it was. Here is what I said. It is the only thing I said in that kitchen that I had thought about beforehand. And I had thought about it for 9 weeks without knowing I was going to get a chance to use it. I said, for 3 months you have been telling this county I am the sensitive one. She said something, I do not remember what. I said Grandpa spelled it out different. He wrote trustee. She did not answer that. She sat at that table with her hands in her lap, and the rooster clock went on making the sound it has made my whole life. And after a while she said, in a smaller voice, well, he always did like you best. I said, no, he didn't. And that is true, and I want to say why, because it is the only kindness in this entire story, and it belongs to her. Walt did not like me best. Walt liked her. He drove her to town for her school job for 2 years when her car was out. He kept her secrets. He never once, in 40 years, said a word against her in front of me, and I have told you that already. He did not put my name on that trust because I was the favorite. He put my name on it because he had watched his own daughter, and he loved her, and he knew exactly what she would do if she ever got scared enough. He was right. That is not a triumph. There is no version of that sentence that is a triumph. I put my cup in the sink and I got my coat, and at the door she said, are you going to take the house from me? I said no. She said, that's what your lawyer says. I said, my lawyer says what I tell him to say, and then I went out. The Pruitt lease came apart 11 days later, and it came apart without anybody suing anybody. Elliot handled it in the most boring way available, which is the way that works. He wrote 1 letter to Wade Pruitt. Copy to my mother, copy to the co-op farm management office. It said the instrument requires both trustees to execute any conveyance or encumbrance, that only one had executed the lease, that the other did not consent and was not going to, and that anyone relying on that lease should know about the defect before spring. That is all it said. It did not accuse Wade Pruitt of anything. It did not have to. He called Elliot back inside of 2 days. I want to say something fair about that man, since he is in this story and never chose to be. Wade Pruitt did not do anything wrong. He got offered ground at $70 an acre by a woman whose family had owned it for 3 generations. And he took it, the way any of us would have taken it, and I do not believe he ever knew there was a second trustee, because the copy he was shown stopped at page 2, the same as the copy the auction company got. He walked. He said he did not want ground with a cloud on it, and he was right not to want it, and that was the end of Wade Pruitt, which left 180 acres with no tenant, in February, 6 weeks before anybody would be in a field. I drove out to Bertie's on a Sunday. Their house sits back off the road behind a windbreak of Scotch pines that Bertie's father planted. Dot met me at the door with her hands full of dish towel and said the words she has said to every person who has come to that door for 40 years, which is, well, get in here. We sat at the kitchen table. There was coffee, and there was one of those cakes. I had the lease with me. 1 page. Elliot drafted it, and I had read every line twice, and then I had shortened it, because the first draft was 2 pages, and it did not need to be 1 year, renewable by agreement each February. Rent at the district average for the current year as published by the Extension Service, which for that year came out to $185 an acre. Bertie read it slowly. He read it the way a man reads something he intends to honor. Then he said, "This is more than I was paying." I said, "It is what the survey says." He said, "I don't want you doing me a favor." And I said, "Bertie, I am not doing you a favor. You are paying full price." The favor was the other one. He thought about that for a second, and then he laughed, one short breath through his nose, which for him is a considerable event. Dot said, "Oh, good," and got up to get the pen. He signed it. I signed it. And under my name I wrote trustee, and it was the first time in my life I had written that word after my own name, and my hand did something strange doing it. Then Bertie said, 1 year at a time, and I said 1 year at a time. And that was the whole ceremony. Nobody said Walt's name. Nobody had to. That is exactly how he did it for 22 years. And both of us knew it. And saying it out loud would have made it smaller. Dot cut the cake. We talked for an hour about nothing. About the pines, which are getting gold, and which Bertie says he will not be the one to take out. About a granddaughter of theirs who works up in Kirksville, a grown woman with a car payment. And Dot talks about her the way you talk about weather you are proud of. About the beans that stood into December and came off in a hurry between 2 ice events, which Bertie mentioned once and did not complain about. About whether the north bottom ought to be tiled, which it ought to be, and which would cost more than either of us wanted to say at that table. I drove home at dusk with a piece of cake on the passenger seat under a paper towel. I want to mark this, because it is the last good evening in this story for a while, and I did not know that. That was the night the ground was safe. The auction was dead. The lease was gone. The 10-year hole was closed. Bertie was on the ground at a fair number with a signature from a trustee who had actually read the instrument. Whatever else happened between me and my mother, the 180 acres was going to still be there in April, doing what it does. I had won the fight I thought I was in. I came in the house, hung my coat, put the cake in the fridge, and stood there for a second, looking at 4 feet of butcher paper taped to the door of it. The timeline had 11 entries on it now. And 3/4 of the way down, in yellow highlighter, with 3 words in the margin in my own handwriting, was a line I had written on the 17th of January and had not touched since. Power of attorney. Recorded 2 years ago in September. Grantor. Colleen A. Dorsey. Order the copy. I stood there in the kitchen with my keys still in my hand. 2 years ago in September, I had been in a hotel in Springfield for 3 days at the state veterinary conference. I know that because I go every year. And I know which year that was. Because it is the year they moved it off its usual weekend and everybody complained. I ordered the copy that night, $11. Paid on a county website that looks like it was built in 2008. It came in the mail 4 days later in a brown envelope. So that is where I stood at the end of February. My mother had taken the one thing money cannot put back, and I had gotten some of it returned the slow way. One number read out loud in a room full of folding chairs. Before the last part, know this, nobody raises their voice for the rest of it. There is no scene where I scream at anybody. What is coming is quieter than anything so far, and it is worse. And the number in the middle of it is $142,000 borrowed against that ground while I was 300 miles away. Subscribe and stay with me. The envelope was thin, 2 pages, a limited power of attorney, recorded 2 years ago in September, granting an agent authority to execute documents concerning my interest in the Walter J. Renner Family Trust, including any encumbrance. At the bottom of page 2, above a notary block, was my name in handwriting. I put it under the lamp, got out a herd health form from last spring with my own signature on it, laid the two side by side, and sat down. I turned the lamp so it came across the paper at an angle instead of straight down, because that is how you look at a surface when you want to see what is on it instead of what it says. Then I did what I do. I did not decide anything. I made a list of findings. Finding 1. The slant is wrong. My hand leans forward about 15 degrees, always has, because I learned to write fast on a clipboard against my own leg. The name on that power of attorney stands straight up. Finding 2, the L in Colleen. I make 2 of them and they are not the same height. The second one is shorter, and that has been true on every form I have signed since veterinary school. On this document they are twins. Finding 3. And this is the one that ended the argument. The Y in Dorsey. When I sign, the tail of that Y goes down and comes back up and hooks left. And it hooks left because 19 years ago I got in the habit of hooking it into the line of the next box on a health certificate, so the ink would not sit wet on the fold. On the document in front of me, the tail went down and stopped. I sat back. Now I want to be careful here, because this is exactly the point where a person can go wrong. I am not a handwriting expert. I have never been trained in it, and I am not going to sit here and tell you I identified a forgery at a kitchen table, because that is not a thing a veterinarian can do, and anybody who says otherwise on the internet is selling something. What I could say was narrower, and it was enough to move on. I could say that is not how I make that letter, and it has not been how I make that letter for 19 years, on thousands of documents, many of which are in filing cabinets around this county with dates on them. That is not proof. That is a reason to keep going. I read the body of it properly then, twice. Limited power of attorney, granting to an agent the authority to execute, on my behalf, instruments concerning my beneficial interest in the Walter J. Renner Family Trust, specifically including any pledge, assignment, or encumbrance of that interest, not a sale. It did not let anybody sell my half. It let somebody borrow against it. The agent named was not my mother. I read the name 3 times and then I got up and walked to the sink and stood there with my hands on the edge of it. Dale Pike, notarized. Ruth Feeney, Ballard, Missouri, with her commission number under it, on a Thursday afternoon in the 3rd week of September. 2 years ago. I want you to understand that the top of my head knew what that meant immediately, and the rest of me took about 4 days to catch up. Because here is the thing that would not fit. 2 years ago in September, none of this existed. There was no auction. There was no lease. My mother had not signed a note for anybody's equipment yet, or if she had, it was only weeks old. Thanksgiving was 2 years away. The group chat was 2 years away. 2 years ago in September, as far as I knew, My family was exactly what it had always been, which is a place where I was called and not counted, and nothing more sinister than that. And somebody had already been to a notary in my name. I sat down again and I did the calendar, and this is the part where my hands got cold. 2 years ago, the third week of September, was the state veterinary conference. They moved it that year off its usual weekend, and half the state complained about it, which is exactly why I can put my finger on that week and no other week in the last decade. Springfield, 3 days, 300 miles from Ballard. I know I was there. I remember the hotel had a fountain in the lobby that made a noise like a hose, and everybody made the same joke about it. I remember 2 of the sessions. I remember standing in a parking garage on the last morning eating a granola bar because the breakfast line was 30 deep. Being sure is not worth anything. I opened my laptop and I started pulling registration confirmation, which I still had in my email because I never delete anything from that account. 2 continuing education certificates with my license number on them. One dated the Wednesday and one dated the Thursday. The hotel folio, a fuel receipt from a station in Camdenton on the way down. And then the thing that actually mattered, which took me 2 phone calls the next morning to get. The state association keeps attendance for continuing education sessions, because the board requires it, because that is how a license gets renewed. They keep it for 7 years. They emailed me a scan. Thursday afternoon, 2 o'clock session on antimicrobial stewardship in beef operations. Line 11 on the sheet, my name, my license number, and my initials in my own hand, in a hotel ballroom in Springfield. At the same hour, a notary in Ballard was watching somebody sign my name to a document that let them borrow against my grandfather's ground. I put that sheet next to the power of attorney on the table. Then I sat there for a long time with the lamp on. I had spent 3 months thinking about what my family had taken from me. The holiday, the ground, the county's good opinion. This was different, and it took me until the middle of that night to work out how, for 2 years, on the public record of Hollis County, Missouri, there had been a Colleen Dorsey who was not me. She had gone into an office on a Thursday afternoon. She had shown some kind of identification. She had picked up a pen and made a version of my name with the tail of the Y stopping short, and then she had gone away again, and everything she did after that was mine. I called Elliot Vance at 8 the next morning, and he cleared his 10 o'clock. I read him the document, then I read him the attendance sheet, then I told him about the Y. He was quiet for a second, and then he said, "All right, send me all of it. And then let me tell you what you have and what you do not have." What I had, he said, was a recorded instrument with a defect I could describe but not prove. He was blunt about it, and I needed him to be. He said, "Being 300 miles away does not void a document. People sign things in advance. People hand somebody a signed form to walk over to an office. A closing agent who sees your name and a notary seal is entitled to rely on it. And if all you have is your own word, you are a woman contradicting a public record." I said, "So what does void it?" And he said, "The notary's own file." He explained it, and I will give it to you the way he gave it to me, because it is the only piece of law in this entire story that I have carried around ever since. He said, "In this state, a notary is not a rubber stamp. A notary is a witness required by statute to keep a journal, bound book, numbered pages, an entry for every notarial act, recording what the act was, when, who appeared, and how that person was identified. And they have to keep it 10 years, not out of politeness. It is the law." He said, "So there are 2 possibilities. Either you appeared in that office on that Thursday and there is a line in a book that says so, or you did not. And there is a line with somebody else's name on it, or no line at all." He said, "The paper on your table is what somebody wants the county to believe. The book is what happened. I asked him what I should do. He said, "Order a certified copy of the note. First, before anything else. Find out what was borrowed and how much, because everything else depends on the size of it." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because a small number is a stupid thing somebody did once, and a large number is a plan." It took 9 days to get, most of which was a lender in Sedalia deciding whether they were allowed to talk to me, which they were, because I was the one whose interest had been pledged, $142,000, secured by a pledge of the beneficial interest of Colleen A. Dorsey in the Walter J. Renner Family Trust, executed by an agent under a recorded power of attorney, borrower of record, Pike Grading LLC, guarantor, Dale R. Pike. I read that number in my truck outside the post office, and I want to tell you that I did not feel anything at all for about a minute, and then I got out and walked around the building once in the cold. And then I came back and sat down and read it again, $142,000 2 years ago, in September. Now I want to go back to my mother in that kitchen, because this is where her story and my story finally sit down next to each other. She told me she had signed a note for Dale's equipment in the spring of the year before last. That is roughly 18 months before that September. She told me she did not tell my father. She told me she has $14,000 and a Social Security check. She was telling me the truth. That is the thing. She was telling me the truth about her own piece of it, and her piece of it was real, and it was crushing her. And she never once mentioned $142,000 because she did not know about it. I sat in that truck and understood, for the first time, that my mother was not the top of this. Everything she had done, the letter in June, the lease, the auction, the story at the church, the document with the sticker on page 4, all of it was a woman trying to get out from under a note she had signed. And underneath her, 2 years earlier, somebody had already been to a notary. Elliot asked me on the phone that afternoon whether I wanted to go to the sheriff. I want to tell you exactly how that conversation went, because people have opinions about it. He said, "This is not a family disagreement anymore. If a person executed a document in your name that you did not authorize, that is a matter for the prosecutor, and you are entitled to walk into that office tomorrow morning." I asked him what happens then. He said, "It stops being yours. You give it to them and they decide. They decide who gets charged and who does not. And they are not going to draw the line where you would draw it," I said. "Meaning my mother." He said, "Meaning your mother, who signed a lease and a listing agreement and mailed you a consent form, and who is going to have to explain all 3 under oath. And your sister, who works in a dental office and whose name is on a mortgage with the man who did this." He said, "I am not telling you not to. I want to be clear about that. I am telling you it is a door that does not have a handle on the other side." I said I needed a week. He said, "Take it." Then he said one more thing. He said, "In the meantime, get the notary's book. Because whatever you decide to do, that book is either going to exist in 10 years or it is not. And I would rather it be looked at while the woman who wrote in it is still around to say what she remembers." I hung up and I sat in my truck in the parking lot of the post office in Ballard, 4 blocks from a storefront with a hand-lettered sign in the window. I did not go to the storefront that afternoon. I drove out to the farm instead, because of a question my father had asked me in a truck stop 6 weeks earlier that I had filed under nothing. The milk house was cold enough that my breath hung. I took the ledger down off the shelf and sat on an upturned bucket with my coat on and started at the front. And it took me 1 hour and 40 minutes to work through it. And I want to tell you what reading that book is actually like, because it is not what you would expect. It is boring. It is the most boring document I have ever held, and it is the reason I understood my grandfather better sitting on that bucket than I did in the 39 years I knew him. Hauled 2 loads to the elevator, wind out of the south all day. Fixed the gate on the west lot, 2nd time. Marilyn come out with the girls, made a rhubarb pie. Marilyn come out, didn't stay. 60 years of a man refusing to say anything about anybody, and saying all of it anyway, by writing down who came and how long they stayed. He never wrote a single unkind word. Not one, in an entire lifetime. In a book nobody was ever going to read. He just recorded attendance. I found the September I wanted about 2/3 of the way through. The entries around it were what they always were. Beans at 18%. Rain. A man about a hay bid. And then, on the Thursday of the 3rd week, Dale come out for the loader. Give him the key. Says he will bring it back. Sat. That is all it says. I read it 4 times. Then I sat on that bucket in the cold with a book open on my knees, and I understood what my father had been asking me at a truck stop in January. Ray Dorsey knew something. He did not know what he knew. He knew that Dale had been at that farm on a day that had come up somehow, in some conversation, in some way I still do not know, and he could not or would not say it to my face. So he asked me a question about a book on a shelf, and then he told the inside of his truck door that he still had Walt's old phone in a drawer. That is what he could do. That is the whole size of it, and I have decided to be grateful for it rather than the other thing. I kept turning pages because I had learned by then not to stop when I found what I came for. 12 pages later, in a different pen, in the smaller hand he had in the last 2 years, was an entry from a January. Ruth Feeney called, says everything is where it should be, and then 4 lines down. The last thing my grandfather ever wrote about any of this, and the only sentence in 60 years of that book that has an opinion in it, told her, keep her book, she will need it someday. I sat there and read that line probably 15 times. I do not know what he suspected. I have thought about it more than is good for me. He did not suspect a forgery, because a forgery had not happened yet when he wrote that. Or, if it had, it was 4 months old and nobody on earth knew about it. I think he was doing what he had done his whole life, which was to look down the road at his own daughter and his own family and put one more thing in place, quietly, early, without insulting anybody. Because that was the only way he knew how to protect a person. He told a 70-year-old notary to hang on to her records. He was 87 when he wrote that. He died 14 months later. I closed the book and put it back on the shelf between the coffee can and the liniment bottle, because it belonged there, and because I was not ready to take it out of that room yet. When I came out of the milk house, my father's truck was in the drive. He was standing at the front of it with his hands in his coat pockets, looking at the machine shed. I said, "How did you know I was here?" He said, "Bertie's boy saw your truck." We stood there for a while. It was starting to spit snow. Then he took his hand out of his pocket and held it out. And there was a phone in it, an old one, the kind with the buttons, in a rubber case that had gone hard. He said, "I put a charger in the glove box years back. Never could get it to come on. Might be dead for good." I said, "Dad," he said, "I don't want to know." And he got in his truck. I want to be honest that I stood in that yard and hated him for about 4 seconds. I don't want to know. That is the sentence of his entire life. That is the sentence that let a woman run a house for 50 years without ever once being contradicted. And then the 4 seconds passed, and I looked at what was actually in my hand. He drove 11 miles in January to ask about a book. He asked Bertie's son where my truck was. He put a charger in a glove box years ago for a dead man's phone, and kept it there. That is not nothing. It is a man doing the only kind of thing he is able to do, at 74, on the wrong side of 50 years of practice at not doing anything. I did not plug it in that night. I want to be honest about that, because it would make a better story if I had. I took it home and I set it on the counter and I looked at it for 4 days while I worked, Because I had a notary to go see, and because some part of me already knew that whatever was on a dead man's telephone was not going to make anything better. It sat by the toaster with the hard rubber case on it. On the 5th night, I plugged it in. The sign in the window still says Tax Preparation and Notary Public, in the same hand lettering. And I think it has been repainted once. Ruth Feeney is 70. She has been notarizing documents in that room for 41 years and doing people's returns for longer than that. And from the 1st of February to the 15th of April, there is a folding chair in the hallway because there is not enough room inside for people to wait. It was the last week of February. There were 2 men in the hallway. She looked up and said my name before I had the door shut, which is a thing older women in small towns do that I have never gotten used to. I said I needed 20 minutes and that it was not about taxes. And she looked at me for a second over her glasses, and then she went out and told the 2 men in the hallway to come back after lunch, and neither of them argued. I put the power of attorney on her desk. I said, I did not sign this. She did not say anything for a moment. She read the whole first page, and then the second. And she looked at the notary block at the bottom for a long time, with her hand flat on the desk beside it. Then she said, "That is my stamp and that is my signature." I said, "I know." She said, "What day?" I told her. And she got up and went to the shelf behind her. I want to describe that shelf, because I have thought about it a lot since. It runs the length of the back wall. It holds books. Not files, not boxes. Books. Standing up. In order, with years written on the spines in marker in her handwriting. Going back into the 70s, she took one down and brought it to the desk and opened it flat. Bound, numbered pages, ruled columns, every line in ink, and no line skipped. Because a numbered book with a skipped line is a book somebody can ask you about. She ran her finger down the dates until she found the Thursday. There were 4 entries on that day. The third one was a power of attorney concerning the Renner Trust at 2:20 in the afternoon. The signer line did not say Colleen A. Dorsey, it said Dale R. Pike. And in the column where she records how the person in front of her was identified in her own writing Missouri operator license, and a number, and the number was not mine. I sat there and looked at it, Ruth Feeney said, in a voice with nothing in it at all. Well, then she said, "I remember this one," and she told me. And I am going to give it to you the way she gave it to me, because there is a piece of it I did not expect. She said Dale came in about 2. She said he had the document already prepared and he was pleasant, and he asked about her knee, which had been operated on that summer. And she remembered thinking it was nice that he remembered. She said he told her the trust needed a signature to keep the equipment financing moving. He signed as agent, in his own name, which is what an agent is supposed to do. Dale R. Pike, as attorney in fact for Colleen A. Dorsey. She notarized his signature, which is exactly what a notary does. She is not required to verify that the underlying authority is real. She is required to verify that the man in front of her is the man whose name is on the line. She did. She wrote it down. And then she pointed at the last column with one finger and said, "But I put a note. The note said, 'No POA of record.' Told him to file it." She said, "I asked him for the power of attorney that gave him the authority, because you should have the underlying instrument. And he said it was at the house. And he said he would bring it by." She said, "He never brought it by." I said, "So what did you do?" She said, "I wrote it down and I waited. And about 10 days later it showed up in the recorder's index, so I figured he had done it properly and gone around me to file it, and it was not my business after that." Then she said the thing that made me put my hand over my mouth. She said, "Honey, if that man walked in here with a power of attorney signed by you, it was signed somewhere else. He did not sign it here and neither did you. And it is not in my book. And if it is not in my book, it did not happen in this room. 2 documents. I had been assuming there was one. I had been sitting at a kitchen table with a lamp studying the tale of a why like a fool, when the whole time the answer was that the document with my forged name on it had never been in front of a notary at all. It had been signed at a kitchen table somewhere with nobody watching, and then it had been walked into the recorder's office in a county where a clerk takes a document and a fee and stamps it, and does not ask who wrote what. The one Ruth notarized was the other one, the clean one. Dale Pike, in his own name. As agent, every document after that leaned on a power of attorney that a notary in Ballard had written a note about, in ink, in a numbered book, 2 years ago, and then had put on a shelf. Ruth photocopied the page, then she certified the copy and stamped it and signed across the seal. Then she opened the book again, took up her pen, and made a new entry, in order, on the next free line, with the date, and my name, and what I had come in for. She said, "I have to. It is the whole point of the thing." Elliot said one word when I read him the note out of Ruth's book, and the word was good. And then he said, "Now go find out whether anybody can put him at that farm." I said, "Why does that matter?" "We have the notary," he said, "because the notary tells us he did not sign it in her office. She cannot tell us where he did." That is when I remembered the coffee can. I want to tell you how long it took me to remember, because it is embarrassing and because it is the truest thing in this whole account of myself. 3 days. I had a green plastic box strapped to a fence post on that farm for 2 years, taking date-stamped photographs of everything that moved in front of it, and I had been carrying the cards home in a coffee can and dumping them in a nail tin on a shelf in my own garage since before any of this started. And it took me 3 days to think of it. Because it was not filed under evidence in my head, it was filed under a dog that killed 2 calves. I went out to the garage on a Sunday morning with a cup of coffee and got the tin down. It is an old Sherwin-Williams nail tin with a lid that you have to work at. There were 19 cards in it, of 4 different brands. None of them labeled, because at no point in 2 years had I imagined a reason to label them. So I sat on an overturned crate with a card reader and my laptop on a feed bag, and I went through all 19. It took most of the day. 16,000 photographs. Deer, raccoon, deer. A possum that came through most nights for a month and then stopped. A barn cat that does not belong to anybody. 2 coyotes together in a march. Never the dog. In 2 years, never once the dog. The 11th card had September on it. The camera sits on the corner post of the north pasture, and it faces southwest, which puts the lane and the gate into the left third of the frame. That was not planning. That is where the post was. 2 years ago. 3rd week of September, Thursday, at 2:11 in the afternoon, a white pickup with no lettering on the door came up the lane. At 2:13, a man got out of it. He is small in the frame and his face is not clear, because the camera is 50 yards off the lane and it was made to photograph deer. But you can see the truck, and the truck has no lettering. And on the tailgate there is a rectangle of paint 2 shades lighter than the rest of it, in the shape of a decal that has been peeled off. I sat on that crate in a cold garage and looked at that rectangle for a long time. At 2:26, the man is out of the machine shed door with something in his hand. At 3:41 he comes back into frame from the direction of the shed, and there is a piece of equipment behind the truck now, and he is bent over the hitch. The last frame with him in it is 3:58. Then the lane is empty, and it stays empty, and a deer comes through at 6:10. 2:11 to 3:58. Ruth Feeney's book says the notarization was at 2:20 in the afternoon, in a room in Ballard, which is 19 minutes from that gate. He was not in her office at 2:20. He was at that farm, which means the entry in her book, the clean one, the one where Dale Pike signed in his own name as agent, and she witnessed it that one did not happen at 2:20 either. I called her. She said, "Oh, I write the time when I start the page. not for every line. That is not the law. That is how I have always done it. Sometimes I do a batch in the afternoon and the times run together. Then she said, but the order is the order. What is above it happened before it, and what is below it happened after. And I said, Ruth, what is above it? She went and got the book while I was on the phone. Above it, same day, was a vehicle title notarization for a man I have known my whole life. And she said that man came in at the end of his lunch hour, and his lunch hour is 1:30 to 2, because he has worked at the parts house for 30 years. Below it was an affidavit for the funeral home, and the funeral home stamps the time received. And their stamp on that document says 4:50. So the Renner power of attorney was signed in Ruth Feeney's office between roughly 2 and 4:50 in the afternoon. And Dale Pike's truck was on my grandfather's lane from 2:11 to 3:58, and the drive is 19 minutes each way. There is a window. It is narrow, and it is real, and I am not going to sit here and tell you it is airtight, because it is not. And Elliot said so on the phone in exactly those words. But then I went back and looked at the ledger entry again. Dale come out for the loader, give him the key, says he will bring it back sat. My grandfather, at 86 years old, wrote down that Dale was at that farm that day. The camera shows a truck with a peeled decal on the lane from 2:11 to 3:58. Ruth Feeney's book shows the same afternoon, in her office, in a numbered book, with a note in the last column saying he had no authority on file. 3 records. 3 different people keeping 3 different books for 3 completely different reasons. None of them thinking about each other. None of them knowing this would ever matter. That is what a paper trail actually is. It is not a smoking gun. It is a number of ordinary people who wrote things down. The phone had been on the counter by the toaster for 2 weeks by then. I plugged it in on a Tuesday night in the first week of March, after I got back from a calving that went the way they go, and I sat down at the table in my coveralls with the smell of iodine still on me. It took 11 minutes to show anything, then a green light, and then a screen with the date wrong by 4 years, and then the little envelope in the corner. 41 unread. My grandfather never in his life understood how to clear a notification. Most of it was what you would expect, and none of it was easy. A reminder about an appointment he did not live to. 2 messages from a seed dealer. A photograph my mother sent him of a bird on a feeder, with no text, in the March before he died. And a group thread. I want to explain this properly, because when I have told this part out loud, people always say, hold on, and they are right to, that thread was not new. It is the family thread. It has existed for 9 or 10 years. It is the one everybody defaults to, for whose turn it is to bring ice. And it had my grandfather in it. And after he died, nobody removed him, because nobody removes anybody. His name has been sitting in that thread for 4 years the way a chair sits at a table. I was never in that thread. That is the part that matters, and I did not understand it until that night. There was not a secret second chat made to keep me out. There was one family thread that had been running for a decade, and I had never been in it. And everyone was so used to that arrangement that adding me was a thing you could do by accident. The phone had no service. The chat runs over the internet, and it came up on my house wireless as soon as it found it. And then it sat there and pulled down 4 years. It took a while. I scrolled to the November and I found the 62 messages, and they were the same ones I already had photographed 41 times. Except for message 31. On my phone, message 31 is a gray line that says the message was deleted, on a telephone that had been switched off in a drawer for 4 years, and had therefore never been online to receive the instruction to remove anything. Message 31 was a message. I read it maybe 6 times, standing up, in my coveralls, next to my own kitchen table. It was sent at 9:14 in the evening. It said added her. Let it sit a day or 2 before anybody says anything. Sent by Dale, and here's the timestamp that took the floor out from under me. The oops, wrong chat text I got from Tessa. the one that started this whole thing. The one I have thought of for 4 months as the accident that let me see everything. 9:18. 4 minutes. 4 minutes after he wrote, added her, "My sister sent me a text calling it a mistake." I sat down. I want to walk through what I actually understood in that kitchen, because it came in pieces, not all at once, and the pieces came in the wrong order. The first piece was small and stupid, and it was about Tessa. She had not typed "oops, wrong chat" because she panicked and made an error. She had typed it because her husband told her to. In the 4 minutes between, the second piece was that nobody in that thread ever asked who added me, not once, in 62 messages. In the 2 weeks after, my mother wrote "don't let her know until the papers are signed," and she wrote "act normal if she texts," and at no point did any human being in that conversation say, "Wait, how is Colleen in here?" Which meant either nobody noticed or somebody had already answered the question. And the third piece is the one that took me until about 2 in the morning. I had been carrying an idea around since November, and the idea was so simple I never examined it. The idea was that I found out by luck. A man typed the wrong name in a contact list, and an accident let me see what my family was doing, and everything I did afterward was mine. Every single thing I had done since Thanksgiving morning had felt like the first genuinely free act of my adult life. The one line I sent, the number I read out at the co-op, the lease I signed with my own name and the word trustee after it. I had been so pleased with myself about the counting. Added her 2 words at 9:14 at night from the man whose name was on $142,000. I did not sleep at all that night. I did not make a timeline. I did not write anything on the butcher paper. I sat in a chair in the dark in my kitchen with an old telephone glowing on the table in front of me, and the thing I kept circling was not why. It was this: if he wanted me to see it, then he wanted the sale stopped, and if he wanted the sale stopped, then he was on my side of it, and he had been on my side of it since before I knew there were sides. And that made no sense at all, unless the thing he was afraid of was not his mother-in-law losing her house. It took Elliot about 90 seconds on the phone the next morning, and he did not enjoy it. I told him what the message said. Then I asked him the question I had been holding since 2 in the morning, which was, why would a man who stole from that ground want the sale of it stopped? He said, "Because of what a sale is," I said, meaning. And he explained it. And I am going to lay it out here the way I finally laid it out on the butcher paper, in 6 lines. Because it is the whole architecture of 2 years, and it is not complicated once somebody says it out loud. 1. 2 years ago, Dale used a forged power of attorney to pledge my interest in that trust, and borrowed $142,000. 2. That worked, and kept working. For one reason, only nobody touched the ground. A pledge sits in a drawer at a lender in Sedalia. Nobody looks at it. It only becomes visible when somebody goes and looks. 3. Then his business went further down, and my mother, who had co-signed his equipment note and was terrified, decided the way out was to sell the farm. 4. A sale is exactly the thing that makes somebody go and look. An auction closing means a title examination, and a title examination on trust property means somebody pulls every instrument recorded against that legal description for years back, and reads them, and asks about them. 5. Which means the day that sale closed, a closing agent would have found a power of attorney signed by a woman who had never signed it, securing a debt she had never heard of, and my mother's rescue would have detonated in her son-in-law's lap. 6. So the sale had to die. But it could not die because Dale killed it, because the man who fights the sale is the first man anybody looks at. I said, so he needed somebody else to stop it. Elliot said, he needed somebody with standing, who would find the trust on her own, and who would go at it in a way nobody could talk out of. Then he said, and he was careful about it, he said, "I want to say something, and I want you to hear it as a lawyer talking. There is no document that proves he added you on purpose to make you do that. He can say he added you by mistake and thought better of it and told his wife to cover. A jury could believe that." I said. "I know." He said, "So what do you want to do?" And I said, "I want to sit with it," and I hung up, and I did not sit with it. I drove the loop I do when there is nothing wrong with any animal anywhere in this county, and I need my hands on a wheel. Out past the elevator, north on the gravel, past the farm, past the Doyle place, around the section and back. He did not need me to win. That is what I got to. Somewhere on the north side of the section with the heater going. He needed me to detonate. He knew what I am. He has been at that table for 9 years. He has watched me drive 6 hours to move a truck and take 9 days off in breeding season and pay for a roof over the phone from a job site. And he has watched all of it be unremarked upon every time for 9 years. He knew that if I ever saw it written down, in my mother's own words, in a list where my name was not, I would not scream and I would not call anybody. I would go and find the paper, because that is what I am, and I have never once been anything else in front of that man. He did not gamble on my anger. Anger would have been useless to him. Anger calls people at 11 at night and gets talked down by morning. He gambled on my dignity. He worked out the exact number of messages it would take. And here is the part I have not been able to put down. Thanksgiving morning, 9:48. Me at my own table with a cup of coffee, counting 4 chairs and a photograph the way I count a dose, twice, out loud, with my finger on the screen. And then sending 11 words after 11 days of rewriting them down to the bone. I have never in my life been prouder of anything I did than I was of that. It was the first time I ever stopped being useful and started being a person. And I have carried that morning around all winter like a coin in a pocket. He scheduled it. Not the words. He did not know the words, but the shape of it, the day of it, the fact that some version of it was coming, and that it would land on the auction like a dropped anvil that was his. And it was his before I ever read the first message. I pulled over on the gravel about a half-mile past the farm and sat there with the truck running. The last 4 months went past me in the wrong order. The trust. The lease at $70. My mother in a church kitchen. Gary Renwick saying family business into a wind. The co-op meeting. My father turning a coffee cup a quarter turn. Bertie with his cap in his hands at 7 in the morning. All of it real. All of it exactly as bad as it was. And underneath it, running the whole time, a man who was pleasant to everybody and who remembered your knee surgery. Then I did something I want to report accurately because it is not admirable. I laughed. 1 breath in a truck on a gravel road at nothing. Because I had spent 19 years telling people that the animal cannot tell you where it hurts, and the owner will always tell you wrong. And it turned out I had been standing in the lot for 4 months looking at the cow. The whole time. The man holding the halter was the one who called me. I called my sister and not her husband. And I have been asked why more than once. The honest answer is that I did not trust myself to walk into that house cold. I had been carrying $142,000 and a photograph of a truck for 11 days, and I wanted one conversation with somebody who was not going to be pleasant at me. We met at the Dutchman, in the same booth where my father had turned his coffee cup. She came in wearing her scrubs, which meant she had come straight from the office, and she sat down and said, "Is this about the farm?" in a voice that had all the fight already gone out of it. I said, "Sort of." I had 3 things in a folder. I put out 1. I did not put out the loan. I did not put out the trail camera photographs. I put out the certified copy of 1 page of Ruth Feeney's book. With the seal on it, I said, read the 3rd line. She read it. Her lips moved a little. Then she read the last column, which is the one with the note in it. And I watched her get to the words "no POA of record," told him to file it. And I watched her stop. She said, "What is this?" I said, "That is the day somebody used a power of attorney with my name on it. I was in Springfield. I have the sign-in sheet." She said, "I don't understand." And I said, "Tessa, did you know he had a power of attorney for me?" She said no. And then she said it again, faster. And her hand went flat on the table on top of the page, which I thought at first was defensive, and was not. She said, "When I told her the September," and my sister sat back in a vinyl booth and said, "That is when the second machine came." I said, "What?" She said, "The excavator, the big one. He came home in September and said the financing had gone through, and he had been sweating it for a month, and it had gone through." She said, "I asked him whose money, and he said, the bank in Sedalia." Then she said, "And I asked him what he put up," and she stopped. I said, "What did he say?" She said, "He said, 'Mom.'" I want to be careful about the next 90 seconds because they were the only 90 seconds in this entire winter where somebody in my family told me the truth without being cornered into it. She said, "For 2 years, I have believed my mother put her name on that machine. I have felt sick about it every single day. I have been in her kitchen 20 times and not been able to look at her. And when she signed that lease in June, I thought, well, she is trying to fix what she got into for us. She said I have been letting her carry it because I thought it was hers to carry." I said, "She did sign a note, the equipment note, the year before. That is real," she told me herself. And Tessa said, "I know. That is a different one. That one is $40,000. Then she put both hands over her face for a second and said, "Oh, that is the whole thing. That is my sister's entire moment in this story. It is one syllable in a truck stop booth. I want to say what I think is true about Tessa, and I am not going to be generous about it, and I am not going to be cruel either. She did wrong." She sat in a group chat and typed, "Tell her it's canceled." She believed that last year, about her own sister, in front of her mother, and she meant it, and she has never taken that back. She let a holiday be arranged around keeping me out of a building. She wrote "sign" on a sticker in her own round handwriting and put it on page 4. None of that is undone by anything on that page in front of her. And also she did not know. She has spent 2 years thinking her husband borrowed against an old woman's signature, which is bad enough that she could not look her mother in the face. And it turns out that was the story she was given so she would stop asking. The lie she was told and the lie she told me are not the same size, and I am not going to pretend they are. She asked me what I was going to do. I said I did not know yet. She said, "Is he going to jail?" I said that is not up to me. And then she asked the question that told me she had already started running her own numbers. And I do not hold it against her, because she is 38 and she is on a mortgage with that man. She said, "If this goes to the prosecutor, do they look at Mom too?" I said, "Elliot says they look at everybody." She sat with that. Then she picked up her keys and put them down again. She said, "He's at the house tonight. He's got a crew out at Kirksville till Thursday, but he came back for a part." I said, "All right." She said, "Colleen?" And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "I'm not going to warn him." Then she got up and left. And she did not pay for her coffee. And I have thought about that too, because Tessa has never once in her life walked out of a room without paying for something. Their kitchen has a bar with 2 stools and a light over it. He was at the counter with a part in a plastic bag and a beer he had not opened. He said my name like he was glad, and he almost got up. I said, "Sit down, Dale." Then I put 3 things on the counter. I did not say anything while I did it. I have thought about that a lot since. Whether the silence was theater, some of it was. Most of it was that I had rehearsed sentences in the truck the whole way over, and every one of them sounded like a woman explaining. And I had promised myself in November that I was done explaining. First, the certified copy of Ruth Feeney's page. with the seal across it, and her note in the last column. Second 3 photographs, printed at the drugstore in Ballard on glossy paper, of a white pickup with a lighter rectangle on the tailgate where a decal used to be, on my grandfather's lane, stamped 211, 226, and 3:58 in the afternoon. Third, a continuing education attendance sheet from the State Veterinary Association. Line 11. My name, my license number, my initials. Springfield, Missouri. That same Thursday, 2 o'clock session. He looked at them in order. He did not touch any of them. And then he did the thing I had been braced for and had still somehow not prepared for. He was reasonable. He said, "Colleen, I want to say first that you have every right to be upset about how this whole year has gone." He said, "Marilyn should never have handled the Thanksgiving thing that way. And I told her that at the time. And Tessa will tell you I told her that." He said, "And I know how this looks." Then he explained, "I am not going to reproduce all of it, because it went on for a while and because it was not stupid. And that is the part I need you to understand." It was not a stupid explanation. It was the explanation of a man who was very good at rooms. He said the September had been the worst month of his life. He said the Sanderson job had gutted him, and the bridge bid had gone to a company out of Macon, and he had 4 men and their families depending on him, and a machine sitting on a lot that he could not close on. He said Walt would have signed for him in a heartbeat if Walt had been alive. He said, and that one landed, because it is probably true. He said it was supposed to be for 90 days. He said, I had a contract coming that would have cleared it in 90 days, and the contract went away. And by the time it went away, the paper was already filed, and I could not put it back. He said, I have never missed a payment on it. Not one. You can check. And I said, I did check. You have not. He said, so nobody has lost $1. Then he said, more quietly, I was going to tell you when it was clear. I let that sit for a second. Then I asked him the only question I had come with. I said, why me? He did not pretend not to understand it. He said, because Marilyn was already in for 40,000 and she would not have survived being in for more. I said, that is not what I asked. I asked why me and not Tessa, and not my father, and not the ground itself. And he said it. He said it in a kitchen with the light over the bar, and he said it kindly, which is the part that will be in me for the rest of my life. He said, because you can take it. He said, you have always been the one who could take it. Colleen. Everybody in that family knows it. It is not an insult. It is the truest thing about you. I did not say anything. He said, and honestly, when it all came down, I figured you would be the one who could carry it and not break. Your mother would break. Tessa would break. I said, so you added me to the chat. And there it was. The only crack in a very good performance. About a half-second long. He said, I don't know what you mean. I said, 9:14 at night. Added her. Let it sit a day or two before anybody says anything. I said, Walt's phone was in a drawer for 4 years. It came on. It never got the instruction to delete anything. He put both hands flat on the counter. And I said the 2 sentences I had, and they were the only 2 I used. I said, you signed my name because you decided I could take it. Then I picked up the 3 pages off the counter, in order, and put them back in the folder. I said you never once wondered what my name would say if you asked it. That is the whole confrontation. It took 11 minutes. Nobody raised their voice. Nobody threw anything. Tessa was in the next room the entire time and did not come in. And I know she heard all of it. Because when I came out, she was standing in the hall with her arms crossed, and she stepped back to let me by. He said my name twice as I went out the door, just my name. I sat in my truck in their driveway and did not start it. I did not cry, and I was not shaking, and I was not triumphant. What I was empty, in a way I had not been at any point in 4 months. I sat there 11 minutes. I know because I counted. Then I went home, and for the first time since November, I did not tell anybody anything. Not Elliot, not Priya. Nobody knew what I had, or what I was going to do with it. Except me. My father came to my house on a Saturday in the middle of March, which is the second unprecedented thing he did that winter. He stood in my kitchen and would not take his coat off, and he looked at 4 feet of butcher paper taped to my refrigerator with 21 entries on it, and he did not ask about it. He said, "I want to say a thing, and then I'm going to go." I said, "All right." He said 2 years ago I seen his truck out at the place on a Thursday. Decal was off the door. I asked him about it the next week at the shop, and he said you'd asked him to get the loader and pick up some paperwork for you. He said, and I believed him, because it was easier. Then he said, and when your grandpa's book came into my head this winter, I knew what I was going to find in it if I went and looked. So I didn't go look. I sent you. He stood there in the middle of my kitchen with his hands in his coat pockets. I want to tell you what I did not do, because I have had 4 months to think about it, and I am fairly sure I got it right. I did not tell him it was all right. It was not all right. He had a piece of it 2 years ago and he put it down. And he had another piece in January, and instead of saying 11 plain words to his daughter in a truck stop, he asked about a book on a shelf and told a truck door about a telephone. So I did not say it was all right, and I did not say I forgive you, which he had not asked for. I said thank you for the phone. And then I said the true thing, because he had come all the way over here and stood in my kitchen with his coat on. And he was owed one. I said, you did the most you have ever done. And it worked. And I would rather have had the 11 words. He looked at the floor for a second. Then he said, "That's fair." And he got as far as the door and stopped with his hand on it. And he said one more thing. And it is the only time in 44 years that my father has told me something about himself. He said, "I married into that family in 1974, and I have never once been the one who decides anything. And by the time I noticed that was going to be the whole arrangement, I had 2 little girls, and I made my peace with it. And then I found out you cannot make your peace with a thing halfway. You make your peace with it all the way or not at all," he said. So I made it all the way. And then, he said, "Don't do that." And he went out. I gave the whole file to Elliot on a Monday and told him to do it properly. I want to be precise about what properly meant, because people want it to have been more dramatic. He sent 1 letter, certified, to the lender in Sedalia, with 3 attachments: the certified copy of Ruth Feeney's journal page, the recorded power of attorney, and my sworn affidavit that I neither executed it nor authorized anyone to execute it on my behalf. That is it. That is the entire act of vengeance in this story. 1 envelope. I did not have to go to the sheriff. I want that on the record, because I sat with that decision for 11 days, and in the end it was made for me by a woman in a compliance department in Sedalia who I have never met and never spoken to. Because a lender who is told that a pledge in their file was executed under a forged power of attorney has obligations of their own. They do not get to shrug. They have their own regulator and their own auditors and their own lawyers. And the moment that letter landed on somebody's desk, it stopped being a family matter and became a file with a number on it. Here is what happened, in order, over 11 weeks. The lender suspended the pledge and put the loan into review. They demanded the original power of attorney, and Dale could not produce anything Ruth Feeney would put her name to. The pledge of my interest was released. That took until May. The debt did not go anywhere. It went back where it started, which is onto Pike Grading LLC and onto the personal guarantee of Dale R. Pike, which is exactly where it had been on paper the whole time and where it was always going to land the second the collateral came off. And the lender made whatever report a lender makes, to whoever they make it to. I did not make it. I want to be clear about that. And I have been clear about it with everybody who has asked me since, including my sister. I sent an envelope with true documents in it to the institution that was relying on a false one. Everything after that was other people doing their jobs. That is what Walt understood, and what took me 44 years to catch up to. He did not fight anybody either. He drove to town on a Thursday afternoon with an envelope under his arm, and he put a paragraph on page 3. And then he went home and had pie. 9 years later, the paragraph did the work. It does not feel like winning. I want to say that plainly to anybody who is where I was in November. It does not feel like winning. And if you are waiting for the part where it feels good, I do not have that part for you. What it feels like is quiet. Elliot called me on a Tuesday in April and said he wanted to read me something. He said, "I have been through this instrument 9 times, and I want you to hear the second half of paragraph 11 out loud. It says that in the event either trustee resigns or is removed or becomes unable or unwilling to serve, the remaining trustee shall serve alone with the full powers granted herein. And it names the successor. It names me. My grandfather did 2 things in that office 9 years ago. Everybody in my family found out about the first one that weekend in the kitchen. And they argued about it for an afternoon and then filed it under a thing the old man did. Nobody ever read to the end of the second one. My mother resigned as trustee on the 29th of April. Not out of remorse. I am not going to give you that, because it did not happen and I would know. She resigned because she was 71 and she was tired. And because Elliot's letter to Sedalia had turned her $40,000 problem into a smaller one. Since a lender who has just discovered a forged pledge becomes very interested in every other signature in the file, and hers turned out to be the only clean one in it. She called me the day before she signed it. It was a short call. She said, "They tell me if I step off, it goes to you." I said, "That is what the paper says." She said, "Well..." And then she said, "Your grandfather thought of everything, didn't he?" There was something in the way she said it that I have not been able to name, and I have stopped trying. It might have been bitterness. It might have been relief. With my mother, those two have never lived far apart. I bought her out. An appraiser out of Columbia came in the second week of May and walked the ground and wrote a number, and the number was $206,000 for her half interest. And I did not argue with it, and neither did she. I did not have $206,000. I had $31,000 and a truck with 190,000 miles on it. So I signed a note with a bank in Chillicothe for 110, and the rest is owed to her directly, over 10 years. At a rate the bank told me was fair and that I checked anyway. I want to say something about that arrangement because people have told me I should not have done it. It is not generosity. I am not a generous person, and this was not a gift. It is a mortgage. There is a payment book on the 15th of every month for the next 10 years. Money leaves my account and goes into hers. And every one of those payments is recorded. And at the end of it, the ground is mine free and clear, and nobody in that family will ever be able to say I took anything from anybody. That is what it is for. It is not for her. It is so that in 11 years, when somebody at the elevator brings it up, there is a document. Bertie is on a 1-year lease that we renew every February at whatever the extension survey says, which this year came out to $188. He tried to get me to write a 5-year the first spring, on the grounds that he is not getting younger and neither is anybody. And I told him no, one at a time, and he laughed that one breath through the nose and said, "That's what Walt said. We are going to tile the north bottom next fall. It is going to cost more than I want to say out loud, and we are splitting it," which was his idea and which I fought for a week. Dale and Tessa sold their house in June. I am not going to tell you anything else about that, because it is hers as much as his, and she did not do the thing he did. She is living in a rental on the east side of Ballard, and she still works at the dental office, and she and I speak about once a month, badly, and I do not know what that turns into. My mother comes to the farm sometimes. She does not call first. I will pull in, and her car will be at the end of the lane, and she will be standing at the fence, looking at the north bottom where her father's tile is failing. And we do not always talk. There is one more thing about the word, and then I am done with it. In August, I got called out to the Renwick place at 4 a.m. for a hard calving, because the man in Chillicothe is 51 miles away, and there are nights when 51 miles is the whole thing. Gary was in the lot with a flashlight when I got there. Afterward, when it was done and the calf was up, he stood there and did not look at me and said, "I ought to have handled that different last winter." I said, "You ought to have." And he said, "Well?" And I said, "Well," and I loaded my box, and he has called me 11 times since. He never said the word sensitive. Nobody ever does. That is the entire trick of it. But I have thought about what actually happened out here, and I want to be exact. Everybody who knew me was told I was too sensitive to be trusted with the truth about my own life. And the only reason there is still a farm is that somebody in that family was watching closely enough to notice the tail of a letter, and count 4 chairs in a photograph, and drive out to a fence line every 10 days for 2 years to change the batteries in a camera nobody asked her to put up. It was the same woman. It was the same trait. They were right about what I am. They were wrong about what it was for. There were 4 of us in the yard on a Sunday in the middle of April. Dot brought a cake, because Dot brings a cake. Bertie spent most of the afternoon at the corner post of the north pasture with a tamping bar, resetting it, because it has been leaning since before Walt died and it was bothering him. Ruth Feeney drove out and would not come up to the house. She sat in her car at the end of the lane with the window down, had a cup of coffee handed to her, stayed 20 minutes, and left. Priya came for an hour and spent 40 minutes of it in the drive on the phone with a man in Lynn County who had a mare in trouble. Nobody in that yard had my last name. I am not going to make a speech about that. You can see it from where you are sitting. Near dark, I went out to the milk house. I took the ledger down off the shelf and carried it to the window where there was still some light, and turned past 60 years of a man writing down what he did that day, until I came to the first page with nothing on it. I did not write anything about my mother. I did not write anything about Dale. I wrote the date. Then 3 lines. The way he did it, which is the way you write when you are not writing for anybody. Bought out the other half. 10 years to pay. Bertie on 1 year. Renews in February. Tiling the north bottom in the fall. Then I put the book back on the shelf, in the same spot, and I shut the door on it, and I went and helped Bertie load the tamping bar. 62 messages, 66 calls in 2 hours, 1 page out of a notary's book. Here is the only thing I know now that I did not know in November. And it is not wisdom. It is the truth in my particular case. Nobody hands you your standing. If you have been the useful one your whole life, the conversation always ends with you apologizing. But it is written down somewhere. Somebody wrote it down. So go and find the paper this week. Not to fight anybody. Find out what your name is actually on. Read to the end of it, past the part everybody quotes. And if you know somebody who has been told for years that they are too sensitive, send them this. That is all they need. Somebody who thinks they saw it right. Thank you for sitting with me all this way. Tell me in the comments what your family made you apologize for noticing, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.